A 14-year-old girl climbed onto a table and screamed at 70 Hell's Angels that they had 8 minutes to live. They laughed at her, called her crazy, told her to run home to her mama. One of them, a man with a beard that hung to his chest like Spanish moss, waved her off the way you'd wave off a fly buzzing around your beer. Another one, younger, meaner, told her this wasn't a daycare and she should get lost before someone lost their patience. So she grabbed their president by the arm and pointed at the sky. His face went white. She's right. Move. Now. 3 minutes after the last bike rolled inside an EF3 tornado erased the bar from existence. When the bikers crawled out of the wreckage, the girl was gone. She had vanished into the storm without a word, without waiting for a thank you, without looking back. But they never forgot her face. And when they found her 2 weeks later, what they discovered in that school made 300 of them come back. Not to say thank you, to declare war on everyone who had ever hurt her. This is the story of that girl. Her name was Hadley Dawson, and she learned what death looked like when she was 9 years old. It looked like a green skating. Her grandmother had grabbed her arm that afternoon, fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises that wouldn't fade for a week. Sell her. Now. The old woman's voice carried a tone Hadley had never heard before. Not anger, not worry, something beyond both of those things. Something ancient and absolute, like the voice of the earth itself giving a final warning. Grandma, what's happening? Don't argue with me, child. Move. Hadley moved. She was small for 9 skinny legs, pumping down the cellar stairs, bare feet slapping against cold concrete. The air tasted wrong, metallic, like she'd been sucking on pennies. Her ears popped with pressure changes that made the world feel like it was being squeezed through a fist. She was halfway down the stairs when she heard it. That sound, the sound that would live inside her bones for the rest of her life. Like God dragging furniture across heaven, like a freight train running through the center of the earth, like every angry thing in the universe screaming at once. She turned back. Her grandmother was still in the kitchen, still standing in the doorway at the top of the stairs, one hand on the frame, the other reaching for the cellar door. Grandma, come down. Stay down there, baby. Stay down and don't you dare come up. Pearl Dawson's eyes met her granddaughter's eyes, and in that fraction of a second, Hadley saw something she would spend years trying to understand. Not fear, not sadness, peace, the absolute unshakable peace of a woman who had made her choice and would not be moved from it. The door slammed shut, the lock clicked, and Pearl Dawson walked back into her kitchen to face the storm alone. 20 minutes later, Hadley crawled out of that cellar into a world that didn't exist anymore. The house was gone, not damaged, not torn apart, gone. The foundation remained cracked and buckled with twisted pipes, sticking up like broken fingers reaching for help that would never come. The kitchen where her grandmother had stood was an empty space. The oak tree that had shaded the porch for 60 years had been ripped from the earth and thrown so far, Hadley couldn't see where it landed. She stood in the ruins, barefoot, concrete dust coating her skin like gray snow, and called for her grandmother. She called until her voice broke. She called until the neighbors came. She called until someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and carried her to a truck and drove her away from the place where her childhood had ended. They found Pearl Dawson 3 days later in a field 2 miles from where her house had stood. The details of her condition were kept from Hadley, but she heard the adults whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. The funeral was closed casket. After the service, Hadley's mother Darla had taken her into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hands shaking, but she held a yellowed envelope with careful reverence. Your grandmother wrote this for you, oh. Before the tornado, she kept it in her nightstand. Darla turned the envelope over. On the front in Pearl's careful cursive, it read, for Hadley, when she's old enough. Can I read it? Not yet, baby. She said to wait, so we'll wait. Darla had put the envelope in a shoebox on the top shelf of her closet, and there it stayed, waiting, like a promise, like a ghost. Like the last words of a woman who had known she was going to die and had chosen to die anyway, so that a 9-year-old girl could live. Hadley was 14 now, 5 years of nightmares. 5 years of waking up, screaming, reaching for a hand that would never hold hers again. 5 years of seeing that green sky every time she closed her eyes, every time a cloud moved wrong, every time the barometric pressure dropped and her ears popped and the taste of metal crept onto her tongue. 5 years of learning that grief doesn't fade. It just learns to hide. The apartment where she lived with her mother was small, cramped, and perpetually behind on rent. Darla worked two jobs. Mornings at the diner on Route 9, evenings stocking shelves at the Walmart out past the highway. She left before Hadley woke up and came home after Hadley fell asleep. They communicated through notes on the kitchen counter and text messages that always said the same thing. Love you, baby. Be safe. Lock the door. Darla wasn't a bad mother. She was a tired one. Tired in her bones and her soul in the deep places where exhaustion becomes a permanent resident. She had lost her mother to a tornado and nearly lost her mind to grief. And the only thing keeping her upright was the knowledge that her daughter needed a roof over her head and food in her stomach. Hadley understood this. She understood it the way children of single mothers always understand it, with a maturity that came too early and a loneliness that never left. Millbrook was a small town in central Texas, the kind of place where everybody knew your name and half of them used it against you. Population 4,000, give or take. One high school, two churches, three bars, and enough gossip to fill a library. Hadley's library, her sanctuary. The Millbrook High School library was the only safe place left in her world. Four walls, thousands of books, no one calling her ghost girl or freak or whispering about that weird Dawson kid whose grandma got sucked up by a tornado. The librarian Mrs. Pemberton was a quiet woman who never asked questions and always had a chair waiting near the back window where the afternoon light fell just right. Hadley read everything: fiction, nonfiction, science history. But lately she'd been reading about weather, atmospheric science, pressure systems, cloud formations, tornado prediction. Know your enemy. That's what Grandma Pearl always said. Can't fight what you don't understand. So Hadley studied tornadoes the way a soldier studies the enemy's tactics. She learned about mesocyclones and wall clouds. She learned about wind shear and dew points and the atmospheric conditions that turned an ordinary thunderstorm into a killing machine. She learned the signs: the green sky, the drop in pressure, the eerie stillness that came before the wind. She couldn't control the weather. She couldn't stop tornadoes. But she could read the sky the way her grandmother had read it, with the same instinct, the same certainty, the same bone-deep knowledge that the atmosphere was telling you something and you'd better listen. It was the only inheritance Pearl Dawson had left her. At school, Hadley was invisible. Not the kind of invisible that came from being quiet or unremarkable. The kind that came from being actively erased. Tatum Kensington had seen to that. Tatum was everything Hadley wasn't. Blonde, polished, affluent. Her father owned half the commercial property in Millbrook and funded the school's athletic program with the kind of casual generosity that bought silence and immunity in equal measure. Tatum moved through the halls like she owned them, and in a town like Millbrook, she basically did. The bullying had started freshman year with small things. Comments in the hallway, whispers loud enough to hear. Ghost girl, that was the first name. Then freak, then worse. The rumors came next. Hadley's mom is a prostitute. Hadley's so poor they eat out of dumpsters. Hadley's grandmother didn't really die in a tornado. Hadley killed her for the insurance money. That last one was the cruelest. It spread through the school like poison through a well, contaminating everything it touched, turning even the neutral kids into participants. Nobody wanted to be seen with the girl who might have killed her own grandmother, so they looked away. Pretended she didn't exist. Crossed to the other side of the hallway when she walked past. Hadley learned not to react, not to cry in public, not to give Tatum what she wanted. She learned to shrink, to fade, to occupy as little space as possible, to become the ghost they already thought she was. The teachers saw it happening, some of them anyway. But what could they do? Tatum's father paid for the new scoreboard. Tatum's father funded the science lab renovation. Tatum's father played golf with the principal every Saturday morning. The system protected its investors, and Hadley Dawson was not an investment. So she disappeared into books and weather patterns in the quiet corner of the library where no one bothered her. And she survived. Minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. She was walking home from the Millbrook Public Library on a Tuesday afternoon in late May, 3 books on atmospheric science pressed against her chest when she felt it. The stillness. Hadley stopped walking. The books shifted against her ribs. Her skin prickled like tiny needles pressing from the inside out, and the hair on her arms stood at attention. The air had changed, heavy, wrong. That pressure in her ears like diving too deep in a swimming pool. That metallic taste like pennies dissolving on her tongue. Her body recognized it before her mind caught up. Muscles tensing, heart rate climbing. Every nerve ending firing signals that the conscious brain was still processing. No, 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 no. She looked west. The books fell from her hands and hit the pavement with a sound she didn't hear. Green sky. That same sickly, unnatural green, like a bruise spreading across the face of heaven. Like poison. Like death reaching down from the clouds with fingers made of wind and fury and everything she had spent 5 years trying to forget. Hadley's throat closed up. Her hands started shaking so hard she couldn't make fists. The tremors ran up her arms and into her chest, and for 3 horrible seconds, she was 9 years old again, standing in a ruined foundation calling for a grandmother who would never answer. Run, hide, pray. But her feet wouldn't move toward home. Home was over a mile away through streets with no shelter, no basement, nothing between her and the sky except air and prayer. She'd never make it, and there were people who didn't know. The thought cut through her panic like a blade through smoke. Sharp, clean, possible to ignore. The Thunder Road Bar, 2 blocks ahead. The Hells Angels rally. She'd seen the motorcycles that morning on her way to the library. 70 of them, maybe more, lined up in the parking lot like sleeping dragons. Chrome gleaming in the sun. Their owners were inside the bar, drinking, laughing, living their lives with no idea what the sky was about to do. Hadley knew what she should do. Run home, find shelter, survive. That was the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice any reasonable person would make. But she also knew what an EF3 tornado did to exposed vehicles. She'd seen the photographs in her textbooks. Twisted metal, shattered glass, bodies thrown like dolls. 70 motorcycles in an open parking lot. 70 people who would run outside to save their machines because that's what bikers did. They would run into the storm for their bikes and the storm would kill them. Hadley Dawson made her choice. She ran toward the bar. The parking lot was a wall of noise. Music blasting from inside, heavy bass that she could feel in her sternum. Men in leather vests everywhere. Standing, sitting, leaning against their bikes with beers in hand and cigarettes dangling from their lips. Tattoos and chrome and laughter bouncing off the pavement like something physical. No one was looking up. Nobody ever looked up. Hadley pushed through the crowd, heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack through. "Excuse me," her voice came out thin, pathetic, swallowed by the music and the noise and the sheer overwhelming presence of 70 people who were twice her size in every direction. A man with a beard that hung to his chest like a curtain of rust-colored wire glanced down at her. His vest said Garrett in embroidered letters above a patch she didn't recognize. "Wrong place, sweetheart. This ain't a daycare. There's a storm coming. You need to move your bikes." He laughed, actually laughed. Head thrown back, belly shaking, beer sloshing over the rim of his bottle. "Storm, darling. I've been riding through storms since before your mama was born. We're fine. You're not fine." Hadley grabbed his arm. The leather was warm under her fingers, slick with something that might have been oil or sweat. "Look at the sky. Look at it." He shook her off, hard. She stumbled backward 2 steps. "Get your hands off me, little girl. Go on. Get out of here before someone steps on you. Please, you have to listen to me." Another man walked over, younger than Garrett with sharp eyes and an annoyed expression that suggested he had better things to do than deal with a hysterical teenager. "What's going on? Kid thinks there's a tornado coming." Garrett was still grinning. The younger man looked at Hadley like she was an insect that had landed on his food. "Go home. This isn't your business. I've seen this before." Hadley's voice cracked. She could feel the tears building behind her eyes. Pressure matching the pressure in the atmosphere. Everything building toward a breaking point. "I know what that sky means. You have maybe 10 minutes before..." Before what? Garrett crossed his arms. "Before the big bad tornado comes and blows our bikes away. Honey, I've ridden through hurricanes. A little Texas thunderstorm ain't gonna..." "My grandmother died." The words ripped out of Hadley like something torn from her chest. Raw. Bleeding. The wound she'd carried for 5 years suddenly exposed to the air. Silence. The 2 men stared at her. "My grandmother died in a tornado." Hadley's voice was shaking so hard the words came out in fragments. 5 years ago, same sky, same color. She put me in the cellar and stayed behind. And I never got to. Her throat closed completely. Tears burned trails down her cheeks. Please. It came out as a whisper, barely audible over the music. Please just look. Garrett shifted uncomfortably. The younger man looked away. Something flickered across their faces, something almost human, but neither of them looked up. Kid. Garrett's voice was different now, almost gentle. I'm sorry about your grandma. I am. But this ain't the same thing. You're gonna die. Everyone turned. Hadley hadn't realized how loud she'd screamed. The music kept playing, that relentless bass line thumping away like a mechanical heartbeat, but conversations had stopped. 50, 60, 70 bikers were staring at this skinny blonde teenager with tears streaming down her face and terror burning in her eyes. She had their attention. She had maybe 8 minutes. Hadley did the only thing she could think of. She climbed onto the nearest picnic table. Hey! Someone shouted. She ignored it. Pulled herself up onto the weathered wood, wobbling, arms out for balance, standing above them all for the first time in her life. Listen to me. All of you. More faces turned. More eyes. Some confused. Some angry. Some amused, like this was the best entertainment they'd had all day. Look at the sky. Hadley pointed west. Her arm was shaking so hard she could barely keep it raised. Look at it right now. You see that color? That green? That means a tornado is coming. A bad one. You have 8 minutes, maybe less, to move your bikes inside or lose them forever. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, low dismissive, the sound of 70 people deciding simultaneously that a child didn't know what she was talking about. Kid's crazy, probably on drugs. Someone call her parents. I am not crazy. Hadley's voice broke on the last word. Something tore inside her, some wall she'd built between herself and the grief, and everything came flooding through. I watched my grandmother die. I crawled out of a cellar and my whole world was gone. I know what that sky means. I know what's coming. And if you don't move right now, you will lose everything. A woman near the back laughed, high, sharp, cruel. Sweetheart, that sky doesn't mean... Shut up. The voice came from the back of the crowd, deep, commanding, like thunder rolling across the plains so low you felt it in your chest before you heard it in your ears. The crowd parted. Hadley's breath caught. He was massive, not fat, solid, like someone had carved him from granite and wrapped him in leather and road dust. Gray beard trimmed close, eyes like chips of flint, sharp enough to cut. A face that looked like it had been shaped by decades of hard roads and harder choices, every line a story, every scar a lesson. The patch on his chest said President. He walked toward the table where Hadley stood, and the crowd melted away from him like water from a hot skillet. No one touched him. No one spoke. The music seemed to lower itself out of respect. He stopped directly below her, looked up at her face, at the tears, at the shaking hands, at the absolute conviction burning in her eyes. Then he turned and looked at the sky. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. Son of a bitch, he said it quietly, almost to himself, like a man recognizing something he'd hoped never to see again. Then he turned to face the crowd, and his voice became a roar that made the music sound like a whisper. She's right. Everyone move now, warehouse out back. Get those bikes inside. Move, move, move. The next 7 minutes were controlled insanity. Hadley had never seen anything like it. 70 people who had been drinking and laughing and arguing transformed into a single organism. Keys appeared, engines roared to life. Bikes rolled toward the old warehouse behind the bar in a choreographed rush that looked like chaos but moved with the precision of a military operation. She jumped off the table and ran toward the flow. You. She turned. The president was striding toward her, covering ground with the kind of long-legged purpose that made standing still feel like a personal failure. What's your name, kid? Hadley. Hadley Dawson. I'm Flint. He grabbed her shoulder. Not rough, but firm. The grip of a man who was used to giving orders and having them followed. You know storms. Yes, sir. Then help us. You see something wrong, you yell. Understand. Hadley nodded. Good. Let's move. The warehouse was old, dusty, packed with the accumulated junk of decades. Tables, chairs, broken bar equipment, boxes of things nobody remembered ordering. All of it shoved aside in minutes, pushed against walls, and stacked in corners to make room for the machines. Hadley found herself in the middle of it all, directing traffic like she'd been born to do it. That one there. No. Angle it. Yes. Like that. Next one. Right here. Tight formation. No gaps. We need every inch. The bikers followed her directions without question. These massive tattooed men and women who had laughed at her 5 minutes ago now listened like she was a general commanding troops. Something had shifted. The moment Flint had looked at the sky and his face had changed, something fundamental had rearranged itself in the power structure of that parking lot. The kid wasn't crazy. The kid was right. And being right in that moment was the only currency that mattered. 30 seconds. Hadley shouted. She could feel it now. The pressure dropping so fast her ears were screaming. The temperature plummeting. The wind picking up from nothing to gusts that whipped her hair across her face. We're not going to make it. Yes, we are. Flint's voice behind her. Steady. Certain. Last 3 bikes. Now. Engines roared. Tires squealed on concrete. 3 machines rolling in at speed, their riders jumping off while the bikes were still moving, catching them by the handlebars and running them into position. Hadley pointed at the sky. The funnel was visible now, a spinning finger of destruction reaching down from the clouds like the hand of something enormous and angry. Something that had been waiting for this moment, building toward it, gathering its strength. Everyone inside. Now. The last bike rolled in. The last rider jumped off and sprinted. Flint grabbed Hadley by the back of her shirt and pulled her toward the back wall. Close the doors. Close them now. The massive wooden doors swung shut. Metal brackets slammed into place. Darkness swallowed the warehouse, broken only by thin lines of light leaking through gaps in the planks. Silence. Then the sound. Hadley had heard it before in her nightmares in the cellar and the place where she went when the world got too heavy to carry. But nightmares were shadows of the real thing. This was a Freat train made of screaming wind, a jet engine mixed with 1,000 voices howling in rage. The voice of God, if God was furious. If God had decided that this particular piece of Texas had existed long enough. The warehouse shook, boards groaned and cracked. Something outside exploded, a sound like the world snapping in half glass and metal and wood torn apart and thrown into the spinning darkness. Hadley pressed herself against the back wall. The concrete was cold through her shirt. Someone was praying, "Our Father who art in heaven." Someone else was crying low, choking sobs that tried to be quiet and failed. A woman's voice, steady and calm, reciting words that Hadley couldn't quite make out but recognized as comfort, as defiance, as the stubborn human refusal to die without speaking. Hadley closed her eyes. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I tried." The tornado passed directly overhead. The roof creaked so loudly it sounded like it was screaming. The walls bowed inward, then snapped back, then bowed again. A crack appeared in the door, and through it Hadley saw things that didn't belong in the air. A mailbox. A car door. Something that might have been a refrigerator tumbling through the gray chaos like a toy thrown by a petulant child. Hold. Please hold. Please. Then nothing. Silence so sudden it felt like a physical blow, like someone had turned off the world. Hadley opened her eyes. She was alive. They were all alive. Holy hell. The voice broke the silence like a stone through glass. Flint pushed past Hadley and walked to the door. His hands were shaking. She could see them trembling as he reached for the handle, and the sight of this massive, unshakable man unable to control his own body told her everything about how close they'd come. He pushed the door open. Daylight flooded in, gray and strange. Hadley followed him out and stopped. The Thunder Road bar was gone. Not damaged, not destroyed. Gone. The concrete foundation was still there, cracked and broken like a shattered mirror. A few twisted pipes rose from the rubble like metal flowers. Some shattered glass caught the light and sparkled. But the building itself, the walls, the roof, the bar, where 70 people had been drinking and laughing 10 minutes ago, had simply ceased to exist. The parking lot was a nightmare. Cars flipped and crushed. A pickup truck wrapped around a telephone pole in a way that defied physics and common sense. Debris everywhere. Wood, metal, glass things. Hadley couldn't even identify things that had been part of someone's life 5 minutes ago and were now just wreckage. The old oak tree that had shaded the patio was gone, ripped from the earth roots, and all thrown so far, Hadley couldn't see where it landed. But behind her, she turned and looked at the warehouse. Still standing. Damaged, yes. Missing boards. Cracks in the frame. But standing. And inside, 70 Harley-Davidson sat untouched. Chrome gleaming. Engines silent. Perfect. $3 million in machines. Decades of memories. Lives saved. Because a 14-year-old girl had seen death in the sky and refused to look away. Flint stood in the doorway for a long moment. His face was gray. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He stared at the empty space where the bar had been, at the foundation, at the twisted pipes, at the absolute nothing that remained. Then he turned around. Where is she? Bikers looked at each other, shrugged, checked the warehouse, checked the perimeter. The girl, Hadley. Where? But Hadley was already gone. She had slipped out through a side door during the chaos of the first moments after the storm passed. Not because she wanted to escape gratitude. Hadley had learned long ago not to expect gratitude. People didn't thank invisible girls. They didn't even see them. She had done what needed to be done. That was enough. Besides, she had to get home. Had to make sure her mother was okay. Had to see what the tornado had left behind. Hadley ran. The streets of Millbrook were unrecognizable. Houses flattened into piles of splinters and insulation. Power lines down, sparking and dangerous writhing on the ground like electric snakes. Trees scattered across roads like the bones of giants. Car alarms wailing their useless warnings into the empty air. Dogs barking from somewhere unseen. A child crying. Hadley ran faster. Please be okay. Please be okay. Please be okay. Her apartment building came into view. Still standing. Barely. Windows shattered, roof half collapsed, on one side front door hanging from one hinge. But the walls were up, the structure held. She burst through the door. Mom, sobbing, from the bathroom. Hadley ran down the narrow hallway, feet crunching on broken glass, and found her mother huddled in the bathtub, arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face. Hadley. Darla lunged forward and grabbed her daughter, pulled her into a hug so tight Hadley couldn't breathe. Couldn't move, couldn't do anything except collapse into the warmth and the shaking and the desperate relief of being held. Oh God, Hadley. Oh God, I thought you were dead. I called the library. They said you left an hour ago. I thought, I'm okay, Mom. Hadley's voice was muffled against her mother's shoulder. I'm okay. Where were you? Hadley hesitated. The truth sat heavy on her tongue. The bikers, the warehouse, the tornado passing overhead, while she pressed herself against the wall and prayed. I found shelter, a warehouse on my way home. Not a lie, not exactly. Darla pulled back, looked at her daughter's face, really looked the way mothers do when they're searching for the injuries their children won't admit to. You're sure you're okay? You're not hurt. I'm fine, Mom, I promise. But she wasn't fine. She could still hear the tornado, still feel that pressure, that force, that hungry roar. She could still see the green sky, and somewhere deep inside, in a place she didn't want to look at too closely, she felt something else, something that scared her almost as much as the storm. She felt alive. The next morning, Millbrook counted its dead. 2 people, Harold and Martha Jenkins, an elderly couple who lived 3 blocks from Hadley's apartment. They hadn't made it to shelter in time, found in their living room still holding hands. Mrs. Jenkins had always waved when Hadley walked past. Every morning, every afternoon, a small wave and a smile, as if the simple act of acknowledging a lonely girl cost nothing and meant everything. Now she was gone. The town held its breath and waited for the damage reports. 12 houses destroyed completely, 43 damaged beyond immediate repair, 3 businesses leveled, and Millbrook High School. Hadley stood across the street from what had been her school and felt absolutely nothing. 3 wings demolished. The gymnasium collapsed in on itself like a house of cards. The cafeteria torn open and scattered across 2 blocks. And the library, her sanctuary, the only place in that entire building where she could breathe, buried under rubble. Bricks and broken glass and twisted shelving and thousands of books, all those stories, all those worlds, all those escapes soaking in the rain that had followed the tornado like an afterthought. Hadley stood there and stared and felt the emptiness where emotion should have been. They're setting up trailers in the parking lot, a voice beside her. Mr. Hobbs, her neighbor. Gray hair, kind eyes, deep wrinkles earned by 70 years of Texas sun. Classes resume next week. Can you believe it? Hadley believed it. Nothing stops standardized testing. Not tornadoes, not death, not anything. The machinery of education ground forward with the same blind persistence as the weather itself, indifferent to the damage it left behind. She walked home. School resumed exactly 1 week later. The trailers were small, 20 by 40 feet, designed for 10 students, maybe 15 in a pinch. They crammed in 40, no air conditioning, no ventilation. Just metal boxes baking under the Texas sun, filled with sweating teenagers and overwhelmed teachers trying to pretend that this was normal, that learning could happen in a space that felt like the inside of an oven. Hadley sat in the back corner, as far from everyone as possible, as close to invisible as the cramped quarters would allow. It wasn't far enough. Well, well, well. The voice cut through the pre-class chatter like a razor through silk. Tatum Kensington. Perfect blonde hair, perfect white teeth, perfect clothes that somehow looked fresh and expensive, even in the suffocating heat. She stood in front of Hadley's desk, hands on her hips, surrounded by her usual pack of followers girls, who had traded their individual identities for the safety of proximity to power. Ghost Girl survived the tornado. How disappointing. Laughter from the pack. Sharp practice designed to wound. Hadley didn't respond, didn't look up. She fixed her eyes on the scratched surface of the desk and recited the rules she had taught herself over 4 years of survival. Don't engage. Don't react. Don't give her what she wants. I heard a rumor. Tatum leaned closer. Her perfume was expensive and overwhelming, and the close air sweet enough to make Hadley's stomach turn. Someone saw you running toward the Thunder Road bar right before the tornado hit. Is that true? Hadley's stomach clenched. The blood drained from her face so fast she felt dizzy. Jessica's mom works at the hospital. Tatum's voice was bright with malicious delight. She said some big biker guy came in asking about a blonde girl named Hadley who saved their motorcycles. Can you believe that? More laughter. Crueler now. The sound of predators who had found fresh blood. What did you do? Ghost Girl Tatum's voice dripped with fake sweetness. The kind of sweetness that tasted like antifreeze, pleasant, going down lethal once it hit. Did you show them something special to get their attention? Hadley's hands curled into fists under the desk. Her nails dug into her palms. Don't react. Don't react. Don't. I always knew you were desperate, Tatum continued. But bikers, that's pathetic even for you, Miss Kensington. Mrs. Pruitt. The teacher had finally noticed the commotion. Take your seat. Tatum shot Hadley one last venomous smile, the smile of someone who had gotten exactly what they wanted, before sauntering back to her desk. Hadley stared at the scratched wood surface in front of her. Her hands were shaking under the desk. Her jaw ached from clenching. And the familiar darkness, the one that lived in the space behind her eyes, the one that whispered in a voice that sounded almost gentle, crept a little closer. The first week back was bad. The second week was worse. The cramped trailers made everything more intense, more concentrated. There was nowhere to hide, no library to disappear into, no empty hallways to escape through, just bodies pressed against bodies, heat pressing against heat, and Tatum Kensington's voice following Hadley through every waking moment like a soundtrack she couldn't mute, tripping her in the crowded spaces between desks, so easy when there was nowhere to dodge, accidentally spilling drinks on her homework, whispering loud enough for everyone to hear, but quiet enough to deny. And the rumors. The rumors grew like something organic, feeding on repetition, evolving with each retelling, until the truth was buried so deep beneath layers of cruelty that even Hadley sometimes forgot what was real. Hadley's mom is a prostitute. That's how they afford the apartment. Hadley is so poor she eats out of dumpsters. I saw her behind the Walmart. Hadley's grandmother didn't really die in the tornado. Hadley killed her, pushed her out of the cellar and locked the door, collected the insurance money. That last one was the one that reached inside Hadley's chest and found the place where the grief lived and squeezed it until she couldn't breathe. Because there were moments in the darkest hours of the darkest nights when Hadley wondered if it was true. Not the murder she knew that was a lie, but the responsibility. If she had been faster, if she had pulled harder, if she had refused to let go of her grandmother's hand. The words followed her everywhere. whispered in class, scratched on bathroom walls, posted on social media, where everyone could see and laugh and add their own cruelty to the pile. Hadley stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria, stopped talking to anyone, stopped doing anything except surviving minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. She moved through the world like a ghost through walls present, but not solid, visible, but not seen. And she started thinking about the tornado. Not the fear, not the sound, the peace. Those few seconds when it passed overhead and she thought she might die. When the walls were bowing and the roof was screaming and the world was being torn apart all around her and she had closed her eyes and felt something she couldn't explain. Something almost beautiful. Surrender. Letting go. The moment before the end, when all the pain and all the loneliness and all the relentless, brutal effort of staying alive simply stopped. What would it feel like, she wondered, to just stop fighting, stop enduring, stop existing? Would anyone notice? Would anyone care? She thought about the Jenkins couple, how they died holding hands, how the whole town had mourned them. Flowers and speeches and tears and the kind of collective grief that proved those two lives had mattered. No one would mourn Hadley Dawson. The thought settled into her chest like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples it sent out were dark and cold and reached into places she didn't want to examine. The thoughts came more often now. Late at night when the apartment was silent and her mother was working the late shift and the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock counting down to nothing. Early in the morning when the alarm went off and the prospect of another day in those trailers, another day of Tatum's voice, another day of being invisible, felt like a weight she couldn't carry one more step. In the middle of class, staring at nothing, imagining nothing, becoming nothing. She was sitting alone at a back table in the cafeteria trailer. Food untouched, eyes empty, the darkness pressing in from all sides, whispering its familiar lies in its familiar gentle voice. Nobody would miss you. Nobody would care. The world would keep spinning, and within a week, maybe two, it would be as if Hadley Dawson had never existed at all. She was deep in that darkness, deeper than she'd ever been when she heard it. A rumble. Distant at first, barely distinguishable from thunder, except that the sky was clear and blue, and there wasn't a cloud within 100 miles. The rumble grew, swelled, became a sound that was not one sound, but many a chorus of mechanical voices speaking in unison, building toward a crescendo that shook the walls of the trailer. Engines, not one engine, not 10, not even 50, hundreds. Hadley's head snapped up. Around her, conversation stuttered and stopped. Forks paused midway to mouths. Phones lowered from faces. Every person in the cafeteria trailer turned toward the sound. It grew louder, closer. The trailer walls vibrated. The cheap fluorescent lights overhead swayed. Someone's drink slid across a table from the vibration alone, a half-full bottle of water moving on its own like something in a haunted house. Everyone rushed to the windows. Hadley pushed through the crowd, pressed her face against the glass, and her heart stopped. Motorcycles, not 70, 300. They filled Main Street from end to end, a river of chrome and leather and thunder flowing through the center of Millbrook like something out of a dream. Or a nightmare, depending on which side of the handlebars you were standing on. At the front, on a massive black Harley Davidson that looked like it had been built for war, rode a man Hadley recognized. Gray beard, flint eyes, face like a map of hard roads. Flint, he had found her. The entire school emptied into the parking lot. Teachers gave up trying to maintain order. Students poured out of trailers, phones raised, recording everything, because that's what you did in the modern world when something extraordinary happened. You documented it, you shared it, you turned it into content. Hadley tried to disappear, tried to slip away into the crowd to find a gap, a shadow, a place where she could be invisible. Too late. Flint killed his engine. The others followed. 300 motorcycles going quiet in a cascade of silence that rolled backward through the ranks like a wave retreating from shore. The sudden absence of sound was almost louder than the engines had been. He climbed off his bike, scanned the crowd, found her. Their eyes met across the parking lot. Across the crowd of stunned students and bewildered teachers and 300 bikers who had ridden from every corner of Texas to stand in this parking lot on this day. Flint walked toward her. The crowd parted around him, not because they were afraid, though some of them were. because there was something in the way this man moved that made standing in his path feel like standing in front of a train. He stopped directly in front of her. "Been looking for you, kid." Hadley's voice came out as a whisper. "How did you find me?" The ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "We're Hell's Angels. Finding people is what we do." Hadley was painfully aware of every eye in the parking lot fixed on her. Her classmates, her teachers, Tatum Kensington standing 20 feet away, staring with wide eyes and an open mouth looking for the first time in 4 years, like she had been caught completely off guard. "Why are you here?" Flint studied her face for a long moment. His eyes moved across her features, the way a doctor examines a patient reading symptoms, measuring damage, calculating the distance between where she was and where she needed to be. Something shifted in his expression. Something knowing. "We came to pay a debt," he said, "but now I'm thinking we came for something more." He turned and raised his voice so everyone could hear, not shouting, projecting. The voice of a man accustomed to speaking over wind and engines in the general chaos of life lived at full throttle. "My name is Flint, president of the Hells Angels Texas chapter. 2 weeks ago, this young woman saved 70 of our motorcycles from a tornado. More important, she saved lives. My brothers would have run into that storm to protect their machines, would have gotten themselves killed." He put a hand on Hadley's shoulder. Heavy, warm, the weight of it anchoring her to the ground when every instinct told her to run. "She gave us 8 minutes, climbed on a table, and screamed at us until we listened. Stood there shaking and crying and refused to give up even when every single one of us laughed in her face. Then she disappeared before we could even say thank you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, students exchanging glances, teachers shifting uncomfortably. The first cracks appearing in the narrative that Tatum Kensington had spent 2 weeks building. "We've spent 2 weeks looking for her. And now that we've found her," Flint paused. His hand tightened on Hadley's shoulder. "We're not just here to say thanks, we're here to help." He looked down at her. "What do you need, kid? Name it." Hadley's throat was tight. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "Not here, not in front of everyone." She thought about the trailers, the heat, the whispering, the rumors. She thought about the library buried under rubble. The hiding places all gone. The future stretching ahead like an endless gray road leading nowhere she wanted to go. She thought about the darkness, the gentle voice, the peace of surrender. And then she thought about the other kids, the ones who ate lunch alone, the ones who walked with their heads down, the ones who flinched. "My school." She heard herself say the words as if someone else was speaking them. "It's destroyed. We're in trailers. There's no air conditioning, no space, nothing. We can rebuild a school." "It's not just the building," Hadley's voice cracked, something breaking open inside her, something she'd kept locked away for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "It's everything. The whole place was broken before the tornado even hit. Kids get bullied every single day. Nobody cares. Nobody helps. Teachers are too tired. And the kids who need help most." She stopped, swallowed. "They're invisible. Like me." Flint was quiet. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of 300 bikers and 200 students, and the entire broken town of Millbrook, Texas, all holding their breath. Then Flint crouched down, not kneeling, crouching, bringing himself to eye level with this 14-year-old girl who had saved his people and was now asking him to save hers. "I was invisible once," he said softly, "just for her. 12 years old. Thought about ending it every single day. Know what saved me?" Hadley shook her head. One person who saw me, who gave a damn, who told me I mattered." He straightened up. "What if we did that for every invisible kid in this school?" Hadley stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean mentorship. Real mentorship. Not some after-school program with worksheets and participation trophies. Real people sharing real stories with kids who need to hear them." He gestured at the 300 bikers behind him. "Every one of my brothers and sisters has a story. Pain, trauma, battles we fought and won. What if we shared those stories with the kids who need them most?" His voice carried across the parking lot, reaching every ear. What if every kid who feels invisible had someone who sees them, someone who understands what it's like to feel worthless, to think about giving up, to believe the world would be better without you? Hadley's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. "You do that? Kid, you gave us 8 minutes and saved everything we had." Flint's eyes were bright. The hard edges of his face softened into something that looked almost tender. We'll give you years if that's what it takes. Hadley looked at him, looked at the 300 bikers stretching down Main Street as far as she could see, looked at her school, her classmates, the town that had given her nothing but pain for 5 years. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something crack open in her chest. Not the darkness, not the gentle voice of surrender. Hope, small and fragile and terrifying, barely a flicker. The kind of thing a strong wind could extinguish. The kind of thing that hurt almost as much as despair, because hope meant caring again, and caring meant the possibility of being destroyed all over again. But it was real. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, stronger, the word coming from a place deeper than her throat, deeper than her chest, from the place where Pearl Dawson's voice still lived, still spoke, still said, "Know your enemy and run toward the storm." Yes, let's do it. Flint smiled, a real smile, the first one she'd seen on his face. That's my girl. He turned to face his brothers and sisters, 300 riders, 300 stories, 300 people who had been invisible once and had found each other in the roar of engines and the brotherhood of the road. That's right, listen up. We came here to pay a debt, but we're leaving with a mission. This town needs more than a building. It needs people who give a damn. Who's with me? 300 voices roared their answer. The sound shook the trailers, rattled the windows, sent birds erupting from the trees across the street in a flurry of wings and panic. Hadley stood in the middle of it all, tears streaming down her face, hands shaking, heart pounding, and smiled. The tornado had taken everything from her, her school, her sanctuary, her hiding places. It had stripped away every wall she'd built between herself and the world and left her standing exposed in the ruins. But maybe that was the point. Maybe you had to lose the walls before you could build something better. Maybe you had to stand in the wreckage before you could see what needed to be rebuilt. Hadley Dawson didn't know what came next. Didn't know if hope was enough. Didn't know if 300 bikers could fix what was broken in Millbrook, Texas, or what was broken inside her. But she knew one thing. Her grandmother had given her 8 minutes, and she was going to make them count. The town of Millbrook had never seen anything like it. 300 Hells Angels didn't just arrive. They invaded, but not with violence, with hammers, with drills, with flatbed trucks loaded with lumber and steel and concrete and all the raw materials required to turn rubble into something real. Hadley watched from the sidewalk as the first wave of bikers descended on the ruined school like an army that had traded weapons for power tools. Men and women who looked like they belonged in prison mugshots were unloading construction equipment with military precision, measuring, marking, coordinating with a focus and discipline that made the professional contractors Millbrook had been waiting on for weeks look like amateurs. "You okay, kid?" She turned. Flint stood beside her, arms crossed, watching his people work with the quiet satisfaction of a general surveying a well-executed campaign. "I don't understand," Hadley said. "Why are you doing this?" Really, Flint was quiet for a moment. The sounds of construction filled the silence between them. Saws biting through lumber, hammers driving nails, the sharp crack of a nail gun punctuating the air like mechanical gunfire. Then he reached into his vest and pulled out a worn photograph. The edges were soft with handling, the colors faded to the washed-out palette of a memory that had been held too many times. "See this kid?" Hadley looked. A skinny boy, maybe 12, with hollow eyes and bruises on his face. Dark circles under those eyes that no 12-year-old should carry. A mouth set in a line that wasn't anger or sadness, but something worse. Resignation. The expression of a child who had stopped expecting anything good from the world and had made peace with the nothing that remained. That's me, 35 years ago. Hadley looked up at Flint, at the massive man covered in tattoos, at the president of one of the most feared motorcycle clubs in America, at the granite jaw and the Flint eyes and the shoulders that looked like they could carry the weight of the world. She looked at this man and tried to find the broken boy in the photograph and couldn't make the two images fit. "What happened to you?" "Everything." Flint put the photo away with the careful reverence of a man handling something sacred. Drunk father who hit harder when he drank and drank harder when he hit. Mother died when I was 7. Cancer. The kind that takes its time, makes you watch. After that, foster homes. 4 of them. Each one worse than the last. The last one made my father look like a saint. His voice was flat, factual, the tone of a man who had told this story enough times that the edges had worn smooth like river rocks polished by decades of current. By the time I was your age, I'd tried to kill myself twice. Hadley's breath caught. The air between them shifted, charged with something raw. Third time, I was standing on a bridge over the Colorado River. Middle of the night. Rain coming down so hard I couldn't see the water below, which was fine because I wasn't planning to look. I was planning to jump. He paused. And this guy pulls up on a Harley. Big guy, scary looking, covered in leather and patches and road dirt. Rain running off him like he was made of stone. He kills the engine, gets off the bike, walks over to the railing where I'm standing. What did he do? Flint smiled. The smile transformed his face, made the hard lines soften, made the Flint eyes warm. Nothing. He didn't try to talk me down. Didn't give me some speech about how life gets better or how I had so much to live for or any of that garbage adults say when they don't know what else to say. He just sat down on that bridge next to me and said, "You hungry because I know a place that makes the best damn cheeseburger in Texas." Hadley stared at him. That's it. That's it. We ate cheeseburgers. He told me about his life, about being invisible, about wanting to die, about finding his brothers and sisters on the road, and finally, for the first time in his miserable life, having a reason to wake up in the morning. Flint looked at Hadley. His name was Razor. He died 6 years ago, lung cancer, smoked 2 packs a day for 40 years and the habit finally caught him. But before he went, he made me promise something. What? That I'd do for other kids what he did for me. That I'd see the invisible ones. The ones standing on bridges. The ones thinking about giving up. The ones who've been told so many times that they don't matter that they've started to believe it. His voice dropped, low enough that only Hadley could hear. The construction sounds faded into background noise. The world contracted to the space between them. I saw you, Hadley, that day in the parking lot. Not just the brave girl screaming about a tornado. I saw the way those kids looked at you when we came back. I saw the way you looked at yourself. Like you were already gone. Like you'd made your peace with disappearing and the only thing keeping you here was inertia. Hadley's eyes burned. She looked away, blinked rapidly, studied the gravel at her feet with an intensity it didn't deserve. I'm fine. No, you're not. And that's okay. Flint put a hand on her shoulder. The weight of it was warm and steady and real. But you're going to be. That's a promise. The construction progressed faster than anyone thought possible. It turned out that Hell's Angels weren't just bikers. They were electricians and plumbers and carpenters and welders. They were lawyers and nurses and accountants and teachers. They were every profession and every skill set hidden beneath leather vests and road names in the general assumption that people who look like outlaws couldn't possibly contribute anything of value to civilized society. People see the leather and the tattoos, Shelby told Hadley one afternoon. They were sitting on the tailgate of a truck watching the framework of the new school rise from the rubble like bones pushing through skin. Shelby was Flint's wife. Tall, fierce, with silver hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. They don't see the accountant who does taxes for free for single mothers. They don't see the nurse who volunteers at homeless shelters on weekends. They don't see the contractor who builds wheelchair ramps for veterans and won't take a dime for it. Why do you let them think you're monsters? Shelby smiled. It was a complicated smile, the kind that held equal parts amusement and sorrow. Because sometimes monsters get things done that nice people can't. The mentorship program started alongside the construction, small at first. 10 bikers, 20 students, a converted classroom in one of the trailers that served as a meeting space. Folding chairs arranged in circles. Coffee in styrofoam cups. Awkwardness so thick you could have spread it on toast. Hadley was there for the first session, not hiding exactly, but present in that careful, watchful way she had perfected over years of being invisible. Standing near the wall, observing, reading the room the way she read the sky, looking for signs, for patterns, for the atmospheric conditions that would tell her whether this was going to be a disaster or a miracle. The students were the ones she knew, the invisible ones, the targets, the kids who ate lunch alone and walked the halls with their heads down and flinched when the popular kids walked by. They sat in those folding chairs with their arms crossed and their eyes on the floor and their entire bodies radiating the same message. Don't look at me, don't talk to me, don't see me. Hadley recognized that language. She spoke it fluently. The bikers were not what she expected. Ox sat down across from Bridger. Bridger was a seventh grader who hadn't spoken a single word in class for 2 years. Not to teachers, not to students, not to anyone. He communicated through nods and shrugs and the occasional written note passed across a desk. The school counselor had a file on him 3 inches thick. None of it had made a difference. Ox was the biggest human being Hadley had ever seen. 6'7", 300 pounds, hands like dinner plates. A neck that made his head look small by comparison, which was saying something, because his head was not small. He had tattoos covering both arms from wrist to shoulder, ink so dense it looked like sleeves made of stories. He sat down across from the silent boy, and the folding chair groaned under him like it was filing a formal complaint. You play chess? Bridger shook his head. A micro movement. Barely there. Want to learn? A shrug. The kind of shrug that teenagers had elevated to an art form. The shrug that meant I don't care enough to say no, but I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of saying yes. I'll take that as a yes. Ox pulled a travel chess set from his jacket pocket. The set looked absurdly small in his massive hands, like a toy designed for a child. My grandpa taught me, said chess was the only game in the world where a small guy could beat a big guy just by being smarter. Bridger looked up. For the first time, there was something in his eyes. Not much, a flicker. Interest maybe, or curiosity, or the first faint tremor of hope. I'm not smart. His voice was barely a whisper. Rusty from 2 years of disuse. Who told you that? Bridger didn't answer, but his eyes answered for him. Everyone told him that. Let me guess. Ox set up the pieces with surprising delicacy, his enormous fingers handling the tiny pawns and bishops with the gentle precision of a watchmaker. Kids at school, teachers who gave up on you, maybe your parents too. Still no answer. Still everything answered. Yeah, I heard all that too. Failed out of 6th grade twice. Teachers called me stupids to my face. Said I was defective. That was the word they used back then. Turns out I have dyslexia. Nobody bothered to check. They just assumed I was stupid because I was big and quiet and didn't fit in their box. Ox pushed the board toward Bridger. You know what changed? Met a guy who taught me to play chess. Said reading wasn't the only kind of smart. Said there were lots of ways to be intelligent and the world only measured one of them. He tapped the board. Your move, little man. Bridger reached out. His hand hovered over the pieces. Then he touched a pawn and pushed it forward 1 square. The smallest possible move. The safest possible commitment. But a move. Hadley felt something crack in her chest, a fissure running through the wall she'd built around everything soft and vulnerable inside her. It was the first time she'd seen Bridger do anything in 2 years. The first sign that somewhere inside that silent boy, there was still someone who wanted to be reached. Across the room, Shelby was sitting with Wren. Hadley knew Wren. Sophomore, quiet, long sleeves even in the brutal Texas summer, even when the trailer felt like a convection oven and everyone else was stripped down to tank tops and shorts. Wren wore long sleeves and kept her arms folded across her body and sat in corners and disappeared into herself the way people do when the outside world has proven itself unworthy of trust. The rumors about Wren followed her like shadows. Cutting, pills, a suicide attempt freshman year that the school had hushed up with the efficiency of an institution protecting its reputation. Nobody talked about it. Which meant everybody talked about it just in whispers, just behind hands, just loud enough to ensure that Wren knew she was being discussed, and quiet enough that nobody could be held accountable for the damage. Wren's arms were wrapped around herself. Defensive. Closed. Every line of her body saying the same thing Bridger's silence said. Don't. You don't have to talk, Shelby said. We can just sit here if you want. I'm good at sitting. Wren stared at the floor. Her jaw was tight. Her shoulders were pulled up toward her ears like she was trying to make herself smaller, trying to compact herself into a space too tiny for pain to find. I know what it's like. Shelby's voice was soft. Not the softness of pity, the softness of recognition. To feel so much pain, you need to let it out somehow. To feel like the only way to serve is to hurt yourself. To feel like your own body is the only thing you can control when everything else is spinning out. Wren's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide, startled. The look of someone who had just heard their most private truth spoken aloud by a stranger. How do you... Shelby rolled up her sleeve. Scars. Dozens of them, faded white lines crisscrossing her forearm like a map of old battles, old wounds, old wars, fought in bathroom stalls and bedroom floors, and all the secret places where teenage girls go to bleed. Because bleeding is better than feeling nothing, and feeling nothing is better than feeling everything. 20 years ago, I was you. Shelby's voice didn't waver, sitting in a bathroom with a razor blade trying to feel something other than numb, trying to prove to myself that I was still alive because the numbness was so complete I wasn't sure anymore. Wren's eyes filled with tears. The first crack in the wall. It doesn't get better. Wren's voice was barely audible. Everyone says it gets better. Teachers, counselors, those stupid posters in the hallway. But it doesn't. It just keeps getting worse, and I'm so tired. I'm so tired of fighting something that never stops. I know, honey, I know. Shelby reached out, slow, careful, the way you reach toward a wounded animal giving it time to pull away. She didn't. It doesn't get better by itself. You're right about that. Anyone who tells you otherwise is either lying or lucky, but it can get better with help, with people who understand, with one person who sees you and stays. Wren was crying now, silently, tears streaming down her face in tracks that she didn't bother to wipe because something in the act of being seen, truly seen, had unlocked a door she'd spent years trying to keep shut. I see you, Wren. Shelby took her hand, and I'm not going anywhere. The program grew faster than anyone expected. By the end of the first week, they had 50 students. By the end of the second, over 100. Kids who had never asked for help, who had never raised their hands, who had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility were suddenly showing up, sitting in circles, talking to strangers in leather vests who somehow understood exactly what they were going through. And at the center of all of it, quiet and watchful, was Hadley Dawson. She became the bridge. She knew which kids needed help because she recognized the signs, the way they held themselves, the way they avoided eye contact, the way they flinched at sudden movements or loud voices. She had cataloged these behaviors over 4 years of being an invisible, building a mental encyclopedia of pain that she could now use for something other than her own survival. She knew which bikers had stories that would resonate with which kids. She made the connections, the introductions, the matches that turned strangers into lifelines. Ox with Bridger, Shelby with Wren, each pairing precise, each connection deliberate. Flint called her the matchmaker. You've got a gift, kid. You see people, really see them. I was invisible for so long. Hadley said it without self-pity, just fact. I guess I learned to recognize the others. That's not a weakness. That's a superpower. Hadley wasn't sure she believed him, but she kept doing it anyway. She found Colton. Colton was new to the program. Quiet, jumpy. The kind of jumpy that had nothing to do with caffeine and everything to do with living in a house where peace was temporary and violence was the only reliable weather pattern. He flinched when people raised their hands. He sat with his back to the wall. He wore shirts a size too large, and Hadley knew why, because she had spent enough time studying invisible kids to recognize when clothing was armor designed to hide what lived underneath. She connected him with Rattler, a biker in his 40s with a soft voice and hard eyes and a story that matched Colton's in all the ways it mattered. Rattler had survived what Colton was surviving, had the scars to prove it, had walked through the fire and come out the other side burned but breathing. But there was something about Colton that worried Hadley, something beyond the flinching and the oversized shirts, a heaviness, a weight. Like the boy was carrying something so enormous and so secret that the effort of concealing it was crushing him from the inside out. She was right to worry. She would find out how right soon enough. But first there was a war to fight, a smaller war, a necessary one. The first town council meeting was a disaster. Hadley sat in the back row of the Millbrook Community Center and watched Flint face a wall of hostility so solid it might as well have been made of brick. The room was packed, every seat taken, people standing along the walls and crowding the doorway and spilling out into the parking lot. Mayor Caldwell stood at the podium, face red with anger that looked rehearsed, the practiced outrage of a politician who had already decided his position and was now performing conviction for the cameras. You cannot be serious. You want us to let gang members mentor our children. We're not a gang. Flint's voice was calm, a calm earned through decades of discipline. We're a motorcycle club. You're criminals. Some of us have records. That's true. But every single person in this program has been vetted. Background checks, interviews, training. We're not asking to babysit your kid's mayor. We're asking to talk to them. A woman in the front row stood up. Hadley recognized her. Mrs. Davidson, PTA president, the kind of woman who ran bake sales like military operations and treated school board meetings like sessions of Congress. My daughter goes to that school. I will not have her exposed to what, ma'am? Flint's voice was still calm, but Hadley heard the edge underneath. The steel hidden in the velvet. To people who look different than you. To people who've made mistakes and learned from them. To people who might actually understand what your daughter is going through. My daughter is fine. Is she? The question hung in the air like smoke. Heavy, impossible to wave away. Because I spent 2 weeks in this town looking for Hadley. And you know what I found? I found kids who are terrified to go to school. Kids who get beaten up in bathrooms. Kids who cut themselves. Kids who think about driving their cars off bridges. Gasps from the audience. The sound of a community confronted with truths it had spent years avoiding. I found teachers who are so overwhelmed they can't see what's happening right in front of them. I found parents who are so busy they don't notice their kids are dying inside. I found a community that is so wrapped up in looking good that it can't see how broken it really is. Mayor Caldwell's face had gone from red to purple. The veins in his neck were visible from the back row. Now you listen here. No, you listen. Flint's voice finally rose, not to a shout, to something beyond a shout. The voice of a man who had spent 40 years riding through storms and had learned that the only way to be heard over the wind was to speak with absolute authority. I have 300 people ready to rebuild your school for free. I have mentors ready to help your kids for free. All I'm asking is for one chance to prove that we're not the monsters you think we are. Silence. The kind that presses against your eardrums, then a voice from the back of the room. Quiet at first, shaking, but growing stronger with every word. Let them train. Everyone turned. Hadley's heart stopped. Her mother was standing up, Darla Dawson, who worked 2 jobs and never attended meetings and spent her entire life trying to be invisible, just like her daughter. Darla, who hadn't raised her voice in public since the day Pearl died, was standing in the back of the Millbrook Community Center with tears on her cheeks and her chin raised and her hands balled into fists at her sides. My Hadley was saved by these people. Darla's voice shook, but it carried. She was in that warehouse when the tornado hit. They protected her. They kept her safe. And now they want to help other kids. She looked around the room, meeting eyes, holding gazes, daring anyone to look away. What kind of town says no to that? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The energy shifted. One person stood, then another, then a dozen. People who had come to the meeting angry and afraid were now looking at each other and reconsidering. Because that was the thing about fear. It was loud, but it was hollow. And when someone brave enough to stand first showed the way, the rest could follow. Mayor Caldwell looked like he'd swallowed something that was fog, fighting its way back up. Fine, he said, through gritted teeth. A trial period. 3 months. 1 complaint. 1. And you're gone. Flint nodded. Fair enough. He turned and caught Hadley's eye across the crowded room. Winked. The weeks that followed were the most exhausting and the most alive Hadley had ever felt. The construction continued. Walls went up. The roof went on. Local contractors shamed into participation by the spectacle of outsiders doing what they should have been doing all along, started showing up with their own tools and their own crews. Then local businesses. Then ordinary citizens with no construction experience and no expertise beyond the simple human desire to do something that mattered. And the mentorship program grew alongside the building. One by one, invisible kids became visible. One by one, alone became together. Bridger started talking in class, just 1 word at first, answering a question about the Civil War with a single syllable that made his teacher nearly fall out of her chair. then 2 words, then sentences, then paragraphs. Ox attended every chess session without fail, rain or shine, weekday or weekend. Ren stopped wearing long sleeves. The cuts had been replaced by a small tattoo on her wrist, a semicolon, the symbol for suicide survivors, for stories that could have ended but didn't. Shelby had one that matched. Eli, a freshman who had been terrified to come out to his family, found Nomad, a biker who had walked that road 20 years before him and survived to tell the story. My dad kicked me out when I was 17, Nomad told him. Lived on the streets for 2 years. Thought about ending it every single day. What stopped you? Found my family. Nomad gestured at the bikers around them. Not the one I was born with, the one I chose, the one that chose me back. Eli's parents eventually found out. His father didn't speak to him for 3 months, but Nomad was there every day, every phone call, every crisis. A steady presence in the chaos of a family rearranging itself around a truth it hadn't been prepared for. And slowly, painfully, Eli's father came around. I don't understand it, he told Nomad at a school event, eyes red with tears he was trying not to shed. But I love my son. I don't want to lose him. Then don't, Nomad said. Just love him. That's all he needs. The school board was nervous. Parents complained. Local news ran a story with the headline, Biker Gang Takes Over School. That made Flint laugh until he cried. They spelled our name wrong, he told Hadley. Called us hellsangels, like we're a geometry club. But the results were impossible to ignore. Numbers didn't lie. Attendance was up. Disciplinary incidents were down. Test scores had actually improved, which shouldn't have been possible in trailers with no air conditioning, but apparently kids learned better when they weren't spending every ounce of energy trying to survive. Then came the video. It appeared on a Friday night. Hadley was at home doing homework when her phone started blowing up. Text messages, social media notifications. Dozens, then hundreds, a cascade of buzzing that made her phone skitter across the kitchen table like something alive and panicked. She opened the first link with trembling fingers. It was Tatum. Tatum and her friends in someone's living room, sitting on expensive furniture, drinking from cups that probably held something their parents didn't know about. And they were mocking Josie. Josie, a freshman with a stutter who had become one of Hadley's first mentees. Josie, who was shy and sweet and worked so hard to get words out that every sentence was an act of courage. Josie, who had never hurt anyone in her life and whose only crime was existing in a way that made cruel people feel superior. In the video, Tatum was imitating Josie's stutter, exaggerating it, stretching the syllables out until they became grotesque, turning a disability into a punchline. Did you see her face? Tatum shrieked through laughter. She's so stupid. Her friends were laughing hysterically. The sound was sharp and bright and ugly, the laughter of people who had never been on the receiving end of cruelty and therefore believed themselves immune to its consequences. I can't believe she actually thinks people like her now, just because some stupid bikers pretend to care. Hadley stopped the video. Her hands were shaking, her vision blurred with tears that had nothing to do with self-pity and everything to do with rage. Pure, clean, righteous rage, the kind that burned away everything else and left nothing but clarity. She thought about Josie, sweet, brave Josie, who had worked so hard to speak in class, who had cried the first time she got through an entire sentence without stuttering, who had started to believe, really believed, that maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it seemed. The video spread the way all digital cruelty spread. Fast, far, without mercy, but not the way Tatum intended. Hell's Angels chapters across the country started sharing it, not to mock, to expose. The comments section filled with messages from bikers, from their families, from people who had been bullied themselves and recognized the poison in that laughter. This is what kids face every day. This is why we ride. This is why mentorship matters. News stations picked it up. Local first, then national. The headline wrote itself, Biker Community Exposes High School Bullies. Tatum Kensington's face was everywhere. Her name was everywhere. Her cruelty laid bare for the world to see and judge. By Saturday night, Tatum's parents had received hundreds of angry calls and messages. Her social media was overwhelmed with fury. The 3 colleges she'd applied to for early admission had all sent letters requesting clarification about her character. Hadley heard all of this secondhand. She was with Josie. The girl had been crying for 6 hours, sobbing until she couldn't breathe, until her body had run out of tears and switched to dry, racking heaves that shook her small frame like wind shaking a sapling. Hadley sat beside her on the floor of the mentorship trailer and held her and rocked her and said all the things she wished someone had said to her during 4 years of darkness. Why, Josie kept asking. The word came out clean, no stutter. Pain had burned the impediment away at least temporarily. Why does she hate me? What did I do? Nothing. Hadley held her tighter. You didn't do anything. This isn't about you. It was never about you. Then why? Because she's broken. Because hurting people makes her feel powerful. Because nobody ever taught her that cruelty has consequences. Josie pulled back. Her eyes were swollen, her face blotchy, her hair matted with tears. She looked younger than her age. She looked like a child who had just learned that the world contained people who would hurt you for entertainment. I wanted to die. She whispered it. When I first saw the video, I wanted to die. Hadley's heart cracked, a clean break straight through the center. I know that feeling. I've felt it too. You have many times. Hadley took Josie's hands. But we're still here, both of us, and that means something. That means we're stronger than we think. Josie stared at her. How do you do it? How do you keep going? Hadley thought about her grandmother, about the cellar, about standing on a table screaming at strangers, about Flint and Ox and Shelby and all the invisible kids who weren't invisible anymore. I found my people, she said, and so did you. Tatum came to school on Monday morning, or tried to. She made it as far as the parking lot before she broke down, collapsed against the door of her car, knees buckling, shoulders heaving, unable to face the hundreds of eyes she knew were waiting behind those trailer walls. Hadley found her there. She hadn't gone looking, hadn't planned this moment. She had been walking from the street toward the trailer when she saw a figure curled against a silver BMW, and something in the way that figure was shaking made Hadley's feet change direction without consulting her brain. She stood there for a long moment, watching. Tatum Kensington, the girl who had tormented her for 4 years, who had called her Ghost Girl and spread rumors about her grandmother's death, and made every single day feel like walking through a minefield in the dark. Crying, broken, destroyed by the same weapon she had wielded against others for years. Public humiliation, digital exposure, the cold and permanent judgment of strangers. Hadley could walk away. Let Tatum suffer. God knew she had earned it. 4 years of cruelty didn't disappear because the cruel person was finally facing consequences. Justice wasn't the same as revenge, but in that moment, watching Tatum Kensington sob in a parking lot, the two felt very close to the same thing. But that wasn't who Hadley wanted to be. She had stood in the darkness and felt its pull. She had looked into the gentle face of surrender and almost said yes. And what had pulled her back was not strength or courage or some noble ideal. It was a hand on her shoulder, a voice that said, I see you. She sat down next to Tatum on the pavement. The asphalt was warm from the morning sun. An ant was making its way along a crack near Hadley's shoe, carrying something twice its size. Go away, Tatum sobbed. The words were thick with mucus and tears and the total collapse of composure. Come to gloat. Happy now, you ruined my life. I didn't do this. Hadley's voice was quiet, steady. Your choices did. It was just a stupid video. It was never just a video. Hadley looked at her. It was years, Tatum. Years of making people feel worthless. Years of making them dread coming to school. Years of making them hate themselves. Tatum's sobs intensified. Her mascara had streaked down her face in dark rivers. Her perfect hair was matted against her forehead. She looked nothing like the polished, immaculate predator who had ruled Millbrook High for 4 years. She looked like a child, a broken, terrified child. Josie cried for 6 hours after she saw that video. Did you know that? She told me she wanted to die. A 15-year-old girl wanted to die because of something you did for fun. Tatum's face crumpled completely. The last wall collapsed. I never wanted, nobody ever means it. But you did it anyway, over and over, because it made you feel powerful, because making someone else small was easier than looking at whatever was making you feel small inside. Hadley stood up. The words came from a place she hadn't known existed until this moment. A place beyond anger and beyond forgiveness. A place that simply saw things clearly and spoke them plainly. I'm not going to pretend we're friends. We're not. Maybe we never will be. But I'm not going to destroy you either. You've done that yourself. She started to walk away, stopped, turned back. The mentorship program has a session tonight. For people who want to change, people who are ready to admit they have a problem and do the work to fix it. Tatum looked up, mascara streaked, eyes swollen, nose running. Why would you tell me that? After everything I did to you, Hadley was quiet for a moment. The ant had reached its destination and disappeared into the crack. Because someone once told me that people aren't their worst moments, that everyone deserves a chance to be better. She paused. I don't know if that's true, but I want to find out. She walked away. That night, Tatum Kensington showed up at the mentorship session. She sat in the back, didn't speak, didn't make eye contact, just sat there and listened to other people's stories and cried quietly into her hands. It was a start. November brought cold weather in the real test. Colton didn't show up. For 3 days, no calls, no messages, just an empty chair in the mentorship circle where a quiet boy used to sit. Rattler noticed first, then Hadley. Something's wrong, Hadley told Rattler. Colton doesn't miss sessions. Not ever. He told me this is the only place he feels safe. Rattler started asking questions. Carefully, quietly, the way you investigate something when you suspect that the truth once found will be ugly enough to change everything. What he discovered made him call Flint at 2 in the morning. We have a problem, a bad one. Colton's stepfather, Roy Stanton, had been beating him for years. Not the occasional slap or shove that could be dismissed as discipline. Systematic, sustained violence. The kind that left bruises in places clothing covered. The kind that came with threats so specific and so credible that silence became the only rational survival strategy. Colton's mother, Jolene, knew. She had known from the beginning, but Roy had made his position clear. If she left it, if she told anyone, if she so much as hinted at the truth, he would kill her. Then he would kill Colton. Then he would disappear and no one would ever find them. He said it calmly, matter-of-factly, the way a man discusses the weather or his plans for the weekend. And Jolene believed him because she had seen what he was capable of, and she knew that his threats were not threats. They were promises. Colton had been hiding it all. The bruises under oversized shirts, the limp he explained away as a basketball injury, the flinch that he couldn't explain away, but that everyone, teachers and students and administrators alike, had chosen not to notice. Because noticing would require action, and action would require courage, and courage was in short supply in Millbrook, Texas. Rattler found Colton hiding behind the school, curled in a ball between the dumpster and the wall in a space so small that a boy his size shouldn't have been able to fit. Black eye, split lip, ribs that were probably cracked based on the way he held his torso and the sound he made when he tried to breathe. Don't call the cops. The words came out in fragments, broken by pain and fear. He'll kill her. He said he would. He'll kill my mom and then he'll kill me. Please, please don't. Flynn arrived 20 minutes later. So did Gravel, a biker who worked with Child Protective Services in his other life. So did Hadley. They sat with Colton in the darkness behind the school and listened. That was the first thing, the most important thing. They listened while he told them everything. The beatings that came without warning. The nights hiding in his closet, listening to his mother scream through the wall. The threats that kept him silent. The shame that made him believe against all reason and all evidence that it was somehow his fault. That if he were smarter or quieter or better, his stepfather would stop. When he finished, Flint's face was carved from granite. Every soft thing in his expression had been burned away, replaced by something hard and cold and absolutely certain. Here's what's going to happen, he said. Gravel is going to make some calls. By morning, your stepfather will be in custody. Your mother will have a restraining order and a safe place to stay. And you, he looked at Colton directly. Eye to eye, man to boy, father to son, though neither of them would have used those words. You're never going back to that house. He'll get out. Colton's voice was a thread. Thin, ready to snap. He'll find us. He always finds us. He always... No, Flint's voice left no room for argument, no room for doubt, no room for the possibility that any outcome existed except the one he was describing. He won't. Hadley didn't ask what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Roy Stanton was arrested the following morning, handcuffed in his own kitchen, still wearing the undershirt stained with his stepson's blood, still reeking of the whiskey that had fueled the previous night's violence. But bail existed, and lawyers existed, and the machinery of justice, which moved with the speed and urgency of a glacier, did what the machinery of justice always did. It processed. It deliberated. It followed procedure. Roy Stanton posted bail 48 hours later, and nobody told the family. The call came to Flint on a Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. Rattler's voice was stretched, thin, pulled taut with urgency that bordered on panic. Colton's gone. Roy's out. Nobody told Jolene. Nobody told us. Flint was in his truck before the sentence finished. He arrived at the apartment to an open door, blood on the carpet, Jolene on the kitchen floor, 2 gunshot wounds in her chest, breathing in shallow gasps that bubbled red at the corners of her mouth. He called 911 with one hand while pressing his jacket against her wounds with the other. Then he heard it. From the back room, a banging. A man's voice slurred with whiskey and rage, screaming obscenities at a locked door. And behind that door, the silence of a boy who had run out of places to hide. Roy Stanton was trying to break down the closet door. He had a gun in one hand and a bottle in the other, and the look on his face was the look of a man who had crossed a line so far back that the line wasn't even visible anymore. Flint crossed the apartment in 3 strides. What happened next took less than 2 minutes, but it would echo through the rest of their lives like the sound of a tornado that never quite fades. Flint stopped Roy Stanton, disarmed him, put himself between the gun and the closet door, and did what 40 years of suppressed rage and protective fury demanded he do. He didn't stop. The gun skittered across the floor. Roy went down, and Flint kept hitting, kept swinging, kept punishing, not protecting anymore. Punishing. Every blow carrying the weight of every child he'd ever seen bruised and broken and afraid. Every foster home. Every bridge he'd stood on in the dark. Every promise he'd made to kids like Colton that the violence would stop. Rattler pulled him off, physically dragged the president of the hellsangels away from the unconscious, bleeding body of Roy Stanton, while sirens screamed in the distance, and Colton sat in a dark closet with his arms wrapped around his knees and blood seeping under the door. Flint sat on the floor, looked at his hands, looked at the blood on his knuckles that wasn't his, looked at the man on the floor who might be dead and might not, and found that the distinction didn't matter to him as much as it should have. Rattler, his voice was hollow. Get the kid. Don't let him see this. The police found Flint sitting on the front porch of the apartment, hands on his knees, blood drying on his fists, eyes fixed on something 1,000 miles away. He didn't resist arrest, didn't speak, didn't do anything except ask for one person. Hadley. She ran to the police station, literally ran, through dark streets past the construction site where the skeleton of the new school stood half-finished against the night sky, past the trailers, past Thunder Road's empty lot, past everything they had built, and everything that was now threatening to collapse. She found him in an interrogation room, handcuffed to a metal table, gray-faced, empty-eyed, looking smaller than she had ever seen him, as if the violence had burned away some essential part of his mass, leaving behind a diminished version of the man who had looked at the sky and said, "She's right." Hadley. His voice was hoarse, stripped raw. "You shouldn't be here." "What did you do, Miss Dawson?" Detective Morrison appeared beside her. "Please come with me." She didn't want to go, wanted to break down that door and sit across from him and hold his hands and tell him it was going to be okay, even if she didn't know whether that was true. The story came out in pieces. Jolene in critical condition, 2 gunshot wounds, emergency surgery, Colton's safe, physically anyway, and Flint. Mr. Harrison was found at the scene standing over the stepfather. The man was unconscious, severe injuries. He may not survive. Hadley's world tilted. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a frequency that matched the ringing in her ears. They let her in to see him. She sat across the metal table. Flint stared at his cuffed hands. "Flint, please look at me." Slowly, his eyes focused on her face. "You shouldn't have come. What happened? Tell me, please." He closed his eyes. "I got a call. Rattler said Colton was missing, said Roy had been released and nobody told us. I went to the apartment. His voice was flat, dead. like the words were being read from a transcript by someone who didn't speak the language. The door was open, blood everywhere, Jolene on the floor. I called 911, then I heard something in the back room. Hadley's hands were shaking. Colton was hiding in the closet. Roy was trying to break down the door. He had a gun. He was going to kill that boy. After everything we did, after everything we promised, he was going to kill him anyway. So you stopped him. I stopped him. Flint opened his eyes. The emptiness in them was worse than anger, worse than grief. It was the look of a man who had met himself in a moment of extremity and hadn't liked what he found. And I didn't stop. I kept hitting until Rattler pulled me off, until there was nothing left to hit. Tears ran down Hadley's face. Is he dead, Roy? I don't know. I don't care. Flint's voice cracked, the first fracture in the flatness. I made Colton a promise. I told him he'd never have to be afraid again. I told him we'd protect him. And I failed. His mother might die because I failed. You didn't fail. You saved Colton. I became the monster they always said I was. Flint looked at her, and for the first time she saw tears in his eyes. Real tears. The tears of a man who had spent 30 years building something and watched it shatter in 5 minutes of uncontrolled fury. 30 years. 30 years of trying to prove them wrong. And in one moment, his voice broke. The sound was terrible. The sound of something fundamental giving way. Hadley reached across the table and took his hands. The handcuff chain clinked against the metal surface. You're not a monster. You saved a child's life. I almost killed a man who was about to murder his stepson, a man who put 2 bullets in a woman who trusted us to protect her. Hadley squeezed his hands. Her grip was stronger than it should have been. The grip of a girl who had held on to a table in a tornado and held on to a sobbing freshman for 6 hours and was now holding on to the man who had given her a reason to keep breathing. That's not murder, Flint. That's justice. The law won't see it that way. Then we'll make them see it. Flint shook his head. The chain rattled. It's over, Hadley. The program. Everything we built. Once this hits the news, it's not over. Hadley's voice was steel, forged in tornado winds and tempered by 4 years of cruelty and cooled in the tears of every invisible kid she had ever held. I won't let it be over. You taught me that. You taught me to run toward trouble instead of away from it. You taught me to fight for what matters. She stood up. The chair scraped against the concrete floor. You saved me, Flint. Now I'm going to save you. He looked up at her. This 14-year-old girl standing in a police interrogation room at midnight, tears on her face and fire in her eyes. This girl who had climbed onto a table and screamed at 70 strangers. This girl who had sat down next to her enemy and offered a chance at redemption. This girl who saw invisible people and refused to look away. She was not the same girl he had found 2 months ago. She was not the ghost Tatum Kensington had tried to make her. She was not the broken child who sat in cafeterias imagining her own disappearance. She was something else entirely. Something that had been forged in the space between destruction and survival. Between losing everything and choosing to rebuild. Flint looked at Hadley Dawson and saw the future of everything they had built together. And despite everything, despite the handcuffs and the blood on his knuckles, and the charges that were coming and the war that was about to begin, he believed her. The next 72 hours were war. The news broke at midnight. Every local station led with the same headline, the same mugshot, the same narrative stripped of every piece of context that mattered. Biker gang leader arrested for brutal assault. The words scrolled across screens in living rooms and bars and hospital waiting rooms across Texas, and with each repetition, the truth shrank a little more and the lie grew a little larger. National outlets picked it up by morning. The story had everything the 24-hour news cycle craved. Violence, controversy, a culture clash that could be packaged into neat opposing segments. On one side concerned citizens protecting their children. On the other, dangerous criminals who had been given access to a school and had done exactly what everyone feared they would do. Nobody mentioned Colton hiding in a closet. Nobody mentioned Jolene bleeding on a kitchen floor. Nobody mentioned the gun or the threats or the years of systematic torture that had led to that moment. Those details didn't fit the narrative, so the narrative discarded them the way a river discards anything too heavy to carry downstream. Mayor Caldwell called a press conference at 9 in the morning. He stood behind a podium, bristling with microphones, his face arranged in an expression of careful concern that had been practiced in a mirror at least twice before the cameras rolled. This is exactly what we feared. His voice carried the rehearsed gravity of a man who believed his own performance. We allowed dangerous criminals access to our children, and now we see the results. Violence, case. A man beaten nearly to death. The mentorship program will be suspended immediately pending a full investigation. Hadley watched from the back of the crowd. She had been standing there since 8 waiting planning, running through scenarios in her head, the way she used to run through tornado predictions, reading the atmospheric conditions, calculating the pressure differentials, identifying the moment when stillness would break into motion. She pushed forward through the crowd. Miss Dawson, this isn't the time. This is exactly the time. Hadley climbed onto the stage before anyone could stop her. A security guard reached for her arm and she sidestepped him with the instinct of a girl who had spent 4 years dodging hands in crowded hallways. She reached the podium. Mayor Caldwell turned toward her mouth, open hand raised in a gesture that was half warning and half bewilderment. Hadley gripped the edges of the podium. The microphones were close enough to pick up the sound of her breathing. Cameras swung toward her lenses, focusing red lights blinking. The crowd shifted. Phones rose. She was 14 years old, standing in front of cameras that would broadcast her face to millions of people, and her hands were shaking so hard the podium vibrated beneath her fingers. But she had stood on a table in front of 70 bikers who could have crushed her. She had sat on pavement beside a girl who had made her life hell for 4 years. She had held a sobbing freshman for 6 hours in a broken man's hands through handcuffs. This was just a podium. Just microphones, just words. You want to talk about what happened? Let's talk about what happened. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. Steadier. The voice of someone who had found the frequency that cuts through noise. A man tried to murder his stepson. A man who had been beating that boy for years. A man who was released on bail without any notification to the family he had been terrorizing. A man who walked into an apartment and shot a woman twice in the chest while her son hid in a closet and prayed that the door would hold. The crowd murmured, low, uncertain. Flint Harrison saved that boy's life. He walked into a nightmare that none of you were willing to walk into, and he did what any decent human being would do. He protected a child. Mayor Caldwell stepped toward her. Now, Miss Dawson, I understand you're emotional, and now you want to shut down a program that has helped hundreds of kids. A program that has cut bullying in half. A program that gave invisible children a reason to keep living. Because one man did what the system failed to do, because one man actually showed up when a child needed him. She turned from the mayor and looked directly into the cameras. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set and her voice did not waver. I was one of those invisible children. I thought about killing myself every single day. Nobody saw me. Nobody cared. Not this school, not this town, not anyone. Until the Hells Angels came. Until Flint Harrison looked at me and said 3 words that saved my life. Her voice cracked. She let it crack. Let the fractures show, because fractures were proof that something real existed underneath. I see you, that's what he said. And for the first time in 5 years, I believed that my life was worth something. She paused. Let the silence breathe. How many more kids have to suffer before you understand? How many more kids have to sit in closets listening to their mother scream? How many more have to stand on bridges or sit in dark rooms or count out pills before this town decides that doing something matters more than looking good? She looked directly at Mayor Caldwell, then back at the cameras. Flint Harrison is not a monster. He's a hero. And if you can't see that, then you're the ones who are blind. She walked off the stage. The crowd parted in silence. Not the hostile silence she had expected. Something else. Something more complicated. The silence of people confronting a truth they had been trying not to hear. The video went viral within hours. 14-year-old girl defends biker mentor. The clip was everywhere, news networks, social media platforms, group chats and email chains, and dinner conversations across the country. By nightfall, it had been viewed more than 3 million times, and the number was climbing with the relentless momentum of something that had struck a nerve the world didn't know it had. Support flooded in from places Hadley had never heard of. Calls and emails and donations to Flint's legal defense fund. Hell's Angels chapters from every state released statements. Former mentees spoke to reporters. Parents whose children had been transformed by the program gave interviews that played on morning shows and evening broadcasts and everything in between. The narrative shifted. Slowly at first, then all at once, the way public opinion always moves like a river, changing course, unstoppable, once the current found its new direction. But Flint was still in jail. The charges were still pending. And Jolene was still fighting for her life in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and fear. Hadley visited Colton every day. He was staying with Shelby now in a spare room at the house she shared with Flint. A small room clean and quiet with curtains that let in the morning light and a bed that didn't creak and a door with a lock on the inside that Colton checked 3 times before he could sleep. He barely spoke, barely ate, just sat by the window staring at the street outside, watching for a truck that wasn't coming because its driver was in a different kind of cage now, waiting for news about his mother, existing in the suspended space between catastrophe and outcome where every minute stretched like taffy and hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. She's going to be okay, Hadley told him. She's strong. She shouldn't have to be strong. Colton's voice was hollow, emptied of everything except the guilt that had moved in like a permanent tenant. She shouldn't have to fight for her life because of me. This isn't your fault. Yes, it is. He finally looked at her. His eyes were old, the eyes of a boy who had lived through things that aged the soul faster than the body could keep up. If I had just kept my mouth shut, if I hadn't told anyone, he would have left us alone. He would have killed you. Hadley knelt beside his chair. The floor was cold through her jeans. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, men like that don't stop, Colton. They escalate. They escalate until someone stops them, and Flint stopped him. Yes, he did. And now Flint's in jail because of me. Flint's in jail because he chose to be. Because he decided that saving your life was worth whatever came after. Hadley took Colton's hands. They were cold, the hands of a boy whose blood had been running on fear for so long that warmth felt foreign. That's what family does. We sacrifice for each other. We fight for each other. We don't run away when things get hard. Colton's eyes filled with tears. The dam he'd been holding, cracked, and the water that came through was years old, decades old. A lifetime of tears that had been swallowed and suppressed and buried under the survival instinct that told him crying was dangerous. Crying made noise, attracted attention, and attention brought pain. I've never had that. Family. Real family. You have it now. Hadley squeezed his hands. You have 300 brothers and sisters who would do anything for you, including me. He collapsed against her. The sobs came in waves, enormous body-shaking waves that rocked them both, and Hadley held him the way Shelby had held Wren and Flint had held her, and somewhere in the chain of that holding, Pearl Dawson held them all. She let him cry until there was nothing left. When he finally pulled back, something had changed in his eyes. The emptiness was still there, would be there for a long time and maybe forever, carried like a scar that fades but never disappears. But underneath it, barely visible, a flicker. Small, fragile, real. The news about Jolene came on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the shooting. She was awake, she was talking, she was asking for her son. Colton ran to the hospital so fast he forgot his shoes. Hadley followed, arriving just in time to see him burst through the door of his mother's room. The sound he made when he saw her sitting up in bed was not a word. It was something older than language, something that came from the place where love and terror and relief all lived together in a space too small to contain them. Mom, oh baby, come here, come here. Hadley watched through the window as mother and son held each other, both crying, both alive, both finally safe in a way that neither of them had been for years. Jolene's hands moved across Colton's back, counting his bones, confirming his existence, the ancient maternal inventory of a woman making sure her child was whole. Shelby appeared beside Hadley, silent, watching. That's what we fight for, she said quietly. Moments like that, is it worth it? All the pain, all the sacrifice. What do you think? Hadley watched Jolene stroke her son's hair. Watched her whisper words Hadley couldn't hear through the glass, but understood in her marrow. I love you. I'm here. We're going to be okay. Yes, it's worth it. The trial was set for March. Flint's lawyer was optimistic. Self-defense, defense of others. Roy Stanton had a gun, a history of domestic violence documented across 3 states, a clear and present intent to kill. Any reasonable jury would acquit. But Flint wasn't interested in acquittal. "I want to plead guilty," he told Hadley during one of her visits. The words hit her like cold water. "What? No, absolutely not. I did what I did. I knew the consequences when I walked through that door. I accept them. You saved a child's life. I nearly beat a man to death." Flint's voice was calm. Too calm, the calm of a man who had spent weeks alone with his thoughts and had reached a conclusion that no argument could dislodge. "I lost control, Hadley. For 5 minutes in that apartment, I wasn't protecting Colton. I was punishing Roy Stanton. There's a difference, a big one. And pretending there isn't would make me exactly the kind of liar I've spent my whole life trying not to be. No one will blame you for that. I blame me." He leaned forward. The chain between his cuffs clinked against the table. "I've spent 30 years teaching people that violence isn't the answer, that restraint is strength, that we are better than our worst impulses. I've said those words to hundreds of kids, thousands. And then when it mattered most, when every principle I'd ever taught was being tested by something real and terrible and urgent, I became everything I told them not to be." Hadley's eyes burned, tears she refused to shed pressed against the backs of her eyelids. "You're not a bad person for losing control once. Maybe not. But I need to face what I did. Really face it. Not hide behind lawyers and justifications and the convenient truth that Roy Stanton deserved what he got. Because even if he did, and God knows part of me believes he did, the way I delivered it was wrong. And wrong needs to be answered." Flint reached through the bars of his holding and touched her hand. His fingers were rough, warm, familiar. "This is how I make it right, Hadley. This is how I teach them. All of them. That accountability isn't just a word you say when it's convenient. It's something you live. Even when it costs you. Especially when it costs you. What about the program? What about all the kids who need you?" Flint smiled. The first real smile she'd seen since that night. A smile that carried sadness and pride, and something that looked impossibly like peace. "They don't need me. They have you. I can't do this alone. You are not alone. You have Shelby, Ox, Rattler, Nomad, 300 brothers and sisters who will follow you anywhere." His grip tightened on her hand. "You were always the heart of this, Hadley. I just helped you see it." Hadley was crying now, couldn't stop. The tears fell onto the metal table and pooled around the base of the cuffs. "Don't do this. Please, I have to. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let this end. Don't let them shut it down. Fight for those kids the way I fought for Colton. The way your grandmother fought for you." Hadley wiped her eyes, sniffed, straightened her spine the way Pearl Dawson would have straightened hers. "I promise. That's my girl." The hearing was standing room only. Every seat in the Millbrook County Courthouse was taken. People lined the walls and filled the hallways and overflowed into the parking lot where someone had set up speakers so the crowd outside could hear what was happening inside. Hadley sat in the front row, surrounded by bikers, surrounded by mentees, surrounded by families whose children had been pulled from the darkness by people in leather vests who understood that darkness because they had lived in it themselves. Colton sat beside her. Jolene, released from the hospital 2 days earlier, sat on his other side. Her arm was in a sling, her face was thin, but she was there, breathing, present, alive. Flint stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, handcuffed head high. He looked like what he was, a man who had made a choice and was prepared to live with its consequences. Mr. Harrison. The judge was a woman, late 50s, sharp eyes behind rectangular glasses. The kind of face that had heard every lie ever told and had developed a perfect immunity to all of them. "You wish to change your plea to guilty?" "Yes, Your Honor." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Shelby closed her eyes. Ox stared at his hands. Hadley gripped the edge of the bench so hard her knuckles turned white. "You understand that this carries a maximum sentence of 15 years, I do." The judge studied him for a long moment. The kind of silence that fills courtrooms when something unexpected is happening and everyone present can feel the weight of it. "Before I accept this plea, I want to hear from you. Why you have an excellent case for self-defense. Your attorney believes you would likely be acquitted. A jury would hear the circumstances and almost certainly rule in your favor. Why plead guilty? Flint was quiet for a moment. The courtroom held its breath. Then he turned and looked at the crowd behind him. At the bikers, at the kids, at Hadley. Because I'm a teacher, Your Honor. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. I've spent 30 years teaching young people that their choices matter, that actions have consequences, that being a good person, a real person, means owning your mistakes even when nobody's watching, especially when nobody's watching. He turned back to the judge. I did what I did to save a child's life. I don't regret that. I would do it again. But I also lost control. I let rage take over. I let 40 years of anger find an outlet, and for 5 minutes in that apartment, I wasn't a protector. I was a weapon, and a weapon doesn't get to choose who it's pointing at. His voice strengthened, grew, filled the courtroom the way his voice had filled the parking lot of Thunder Road on the day the tornado came. If I stand up here and make excuses, if I hide behind justifications, if I tell the world that what I did was right because the man I beat deserved it, what am I teaching those kids sitting behind me? I'm teaching them that rules don't apply when you're angry enough. That violence is acceptable if you can explain it away. That accountability is for other people, for the weak, for the ones who didn't have a good enough reason. He shook his head, slowly, deliberately. I won't do that. Those kids deserve better. They deserve someone who practices what he preaches, who stands up and says, I was wrong and I accept the consequences, and I'm going to use this moment to show you what accountability really looks like. Not in a classroom, not in a circle of folding chairs. Here, in a courtroom, under oath, with everything on the line. He paused. So I plead guilty. I accept whatever sentence you give me. And I hope, I pray, that the young people watching me right now learn something from this moment. Not that violence is the answer. It isn't. But that when you make a mistake, even a mistake born from love, even a mistake that saved a life, you face it. You own it. You stand up straight and you say, I did this. And then you do better. The courtroom was absolutely silent, the kind of silence that has weight, the kind that presses against your chest and fills your lungs and makes every heartbeat sound like thunder. The judge stared at Flint for a long, long moment. Then she did something Hadley had never seen a judge do. She took off her glasses, set them on the bench, pressed her fingers against her closed eyes. Mr. Harrison. Her voice was different now, softer, or maybe not softer, deeper, more real. In 23 years on this bench, I have never heard a defendant speak with such integrity. She opened her eyes. I'm not going to accept your guilty plea. Gasps from the crowd. Shelby's eyes flew open. Ox looked up. Hadley stopped breathing. Your Honor, Flint started. Let me finish. The judge held up her hand. The gesture was small, but carried the authority of the bench and the weight of 2 decades of watching human beings at their worst and occasionally rarely at their best. I've reviewed the evidence. I've read the statements from the arresting officers, from the paramedics, from the Child Protective Services workers. I've watched the video that young woman posted. She glanced at Hadley. And I've read every letter from every child whose life your program has changed, all 237 of them. She leaned forward. You walked into a home where a man with a documented history of violence was actively attempting to murder his stepson. A man who had already shot the boy's mother twice. A man who was armed and intoxicated and separated from his intended victim by nothing more than a hollow core door and a lock that wouldn't have held another 60 seconds. You had seconds to act. You used the force necessary to neutralize an imminent lethal threat to a child's life. That's not assault, Mr. Harrison. That's heroism. The courtroom stirred. Hope rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. However, the judge's voice hardened, sharpened. The warmth receded behind the professional armor that 23 years of bench service had built. I am also troubled by your own description of losing control, by your admission that for a period of time you were no longer acting in defense but in anger. That concerns me, not because it changes the legal analysis, but because it tells me that you are a man who carries something inside him that needs to be addressed. She picked up her gavel. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm dismissing all charges. The courtroom exhaled. Someone sobbed. Someone else laughed. The sounds mixed and merged into a single expression of relief so powerful it seemed to lift the ceiling. But I'm also ordering you to complete a court-mandated anger management program. 52 weeks, one session per week. If you miss a single session, if you skip, if you send a substitute, if you show up late, we revisit this conversation under very different circumstances. She looked at him directly, eye to eye, judge to defendant, human to human. You want to teach those kids about accountability. Teach them that getting help isn't weakness. Teach them that even the strongest man in the room has battles he can't win alone. Teach them that healing is a process, not a destination, and that the bravest thing a person can do is raise their hand and say, I need help. She banged the gavel. The sound cracked through the courtroom like a rifle shot. Case dismissed. You're free to go. The courtroom exploded. Sound, motion, tears. 300 bikers on their feet roaring, kids crying, parents hugging. The controlled dignity of a judicial proceeding dissolving into the raw, messy, beautiful chaos of people who had just watched something extraordinary happen and couldn't contain what they felt about it. Hadley reached for Flint before anyone else. She threw her arms around him and held on with everything she had, with the grip of a girl who had clung to a table in a tornado and hadn't let go. You stupid, noble, self-sacrificing idiot. Flint hugged her back. His arms were shaking. His whole body was shaking. The tears he had held back for weeks finally broke free, running down his weathered face and into the collar of the orange jumpsuit he would never wear again. Learned it from your grandmother, he said into her hair. She would have killed you herself for trying to plead guilty. Probably. He pulled back and looked at her. Thank you. For fighting, for standing on that stage, for not giving up. I made a promise, you kept it. Flint's eyes were bright, red-rimmed, luminous with something that might have been pride or love, or both tangled together so tightly that separating them would have destroyed them both. Now keep the other one. The program. The kids. Don't let this be the end. Hadley squared her shoulders. The way Pearl Dawson would have squared hers. The way a girl squares her shoulders when she's about to climb onto a table and scream. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning. The publicity from the trial transformed everything. What had been a local mentorship program running on passion and adrenaline, and the stubborn refusal of a few hundred bikers to accept that the world couldn't be changed, became something larger, something national, something that had a name and a mission and a momentum that couldn't be stopped by politicians or press conferences or the small-minded fear of people who preferred their heroes to look respectable. Donations poured in. Other schools reached out. Communities across Texas, then across the country, contacted Hadley and Flint and Shelby asking how to start their own programs. The model was simple. Find the invisible kids. Match them with people who had been invisible once and had survived. Let them talk. Let them listen. Let the simple radical act of being seen do the work that no curriculum or policy or institutional initiative had ever managed to do. The new school was finished in January. Hadley stood at the entrance on opening day and watched students stream through doors that hadn't existed 4 months ago. The building gleamed. Fresh paint. New windows. Everything modern and bright and full of the kind of possibility that only exists in places that have been rebuilt from nothing. But that wasn't what made her chest tight. It wasn't the building. It was the library. They had named it after her grandmother, the Pearl Dawson Memorial Library. The words were etched in bronze on a plaque above the entrance, each letter catching the winter sunlight and throwing it back in warm gold. Flint had arranged it without telling her. A surprise she discovered only when she walked through the doors on opening day and saw her grandmother's name on the wall and the world blurred and went sideways, and she cried for 20 minutes in the reference section while Shelby held her and said nothing, because some moments don't need words. They just need witness. You okay, baby? Hadley turned. Her mother stood behind her. Darla Dawson gray, threading through her hair, now lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. But smiling, really smiling. The kind of smile that reached all the way to the back of the eyes and lit something there that had been dark for a long time. Mom, I didn't know you were coming. Wouldn't miss it. Darla walked to her daughter and pulled her into a hug. Tight, Fierce, the hug of a woman who had nearly lost everything and had learned to hold on harder because of it. I'm so proud of you, baby. So incredibly proud. I didn't do anything. The bikers, the bikers followed your lead. They came here because of you. This library exists because of you. Darla pulled back and held Hadley's face in her hands, the same hands that had held her as an infant, the same hands that had wiped her tears after nightmares. Don't you dare diminish what you've done. Your grandmother would smack you for that. Hadley laughed. It came out wet and broken and beautiful. She would, wouldn't she? Absolutely. She'd say, Hadley Ray Dawson, you take credit for your work, or I'll haunt you till you do. They laughed together, cried together, held each other in the library that bore Pearl Dawson's name while sunlight poured through windows that didn't exist 6 months ago, and books lined shelves that had risen from rubble, and everything that had been destroyed had been rebuilt into something stronger. The Pearl Dawson Foundation launched that spring, named after the woman who had given 8 minutes and a lifetime of courage. Hadley was 15 years old and running a nonprofit, and the absurdity of that fact was matched only by its inevitability. She had been building toward this her whole life. She just hadn't known it until a tornado tore away the walls and showed her what was underneath. The program expanded fast. 3 neighboring towns within a month. Statewide within 3 months. And by summer, Hadley was getting calls from across the country. Schools in Ohio and Montana and Florida and California. Communities that had heard her story and seen the numbers and wanted what Millbrook had built. She hired Colton as her first volunteer coordinator the day he turned 18. The boy who had hidden in closets was now a young man who walked into schools and told his story with a steadiness that made adults weep and teenagers listen. He had Rattler's calm and Flint's conviction and something that was entirely his own, a gentleness born from having survived the worst that gentleness could be tested by. She brought Tatum onto the outreach team. The girl who had once called her Ghost Girl now traveled to schools and stood in front of assemblies and said, I was the bully. I was the reason kids wanted to die. And this is what I learned about the damage a person can do when they stop seeing other people as human. It was the most effective presentation in the Foundation's arsenal because it came from the inside, from the perpetrator, from the person who had wielded cruelty like a weapon and had finally looked at the wounds she'd inflicted and felt their weight. The National Youth Mental Health Summit was held in Austin in October. 3,000 people, educators, counselors, parents, politicians. A convention center that felt bigger than Millbrook itself, filled with name tags and agendas, and the organized chaos of people trying to solve problems that didn't have easy answers. Hadley stood backstage, hands trembling, heart racing. 16 years old and about to address an audience that included senators and professors and the heads of organizations whose budgets exceeded the entire annual income of her hometown. You're going to be fine. Shelby stood beside her, solid, unshakable. I'm going to throw up. No, you're not. You're going to walk out there and tell your truth. Same as you've been doing for a year and a same as you did on that table, same as you did on that stage. This is different. There are cameras, important people. What if you change someone's life? Shelby took her hands. What if some kid is watching right now, sitting in a dark room, thinking about giving up, and your words are the thing that saves them? Hadley's breath caught. That's what this is about. Not the cameras, not the important people. The one kid who needs to hear what you have to say. The walk to the podium took forever. 3,000 faces, 3,000 strangers. The lights were blinding. The silence was the loudest thing Hadley had ever heard. She gripped the edges of the podium and looked out at the sea of people. Her mind went blank. For 3 horrible seconds, she couldn't remember a single word she had planned to say. Then she saw him, a boy in the 3rd row, maybe 13, 14, hunched in his seat like he was trying to fold himself into a space too small for anyone to notice. Eyes hollow, face empty. The posture of a person who had given up on being seen and was just waiting for the moment to leave. She knew that look. She had worn it herself. Hadley forgot about the cameras, forgot about the senators and the professors and the 3,000 name tags, forgot about everything except that one kid who looked exactly like she had felt a lifetime ago. She started talking. I was invisible once. Her voice cracked on the second word. She didn't care. I spent 4 years wishing I could disappear, thinking about dying. Believing that the world would be better without me, that no one would notice if I stopped showing up, that the space I occupied was wasted space. And nobody knew. Not my mom, not my teachers, nobody. Because I was very, very good at hiding. The room was absolutely silent. Then a tornado came and I made a choice. I could have run home, could have hidden, could have let 70 strangers take care of themselves. But I saw those people about to lose everything they had, and I couldn't walk away. Not because I was brave, because my grandmother taught me that looking away is the one thing you never get to take back. Her eyes found the boy in the third row. He was sitting up now, listening. The hollowness in his eyes had shifted. Not filled, not yet, but stirred, moved. Disturbed in the way still water is disturbed by the first drop of rain. That choice changed my life. Not because I saved their motorcycles, because for the first time I realized that I mattered. That my voice could be heard, that I wasn't invisible. I had just been looking at myself through the wrong eyes. She told them everything. The bullying, the dark thoughts, the day 300 bikers showed up and offered to fight for kids they'd never met, the mentorship program, Colton, Wren, Bridger, Tatum. She told them about her grandmother, about the cellar, about 8 minutes that changed everything. When she finished, there were tears on her face. There were tears in the audience. The boy in the third row was crying openly, not hiding it, not ashamed. I know some of you are sitting here thinking about giving up. I know some of you are invisible. I know some of you are so tired of fighting that you just want it to stop. She leaned forward. Please don't give up, because the world needs you. Your world needs you. Maybe you can't see it yet. Maybe you're still looking through the wrong eyes. But I promise you, someone out there is waiting for you to save them. Someone needs exactly what you have to give. Her voice broke on the last word. She let it break. Let the sound fill the room. Let 3,000 people hear what courage sounded like when it was real and imperfect and shaking with fear. Find your people. Find your 300 bikers who will show up when you need them most. They're out there, I swear to you. They're out there. The applause started slowly. One person, then 10, then 100, then 3,000 people were on their feet clapping and cheering and crying, and Hadley stood in the spotlight and let it wash over her like a warm rain. The boy from the third row found her after. His name was Beckett. He was 14. He lived in a small town in Arkansas, and he had tried to kill himself 3 times. I was going to do it again. His voice was barely a whisper. Tonight, after the conference, I had it all planned. Hadley's blood went cold. The kind of cold that starts in the center of your chest and radiates outward until every cell in your body is vibrating with the urgency of this moment, this boy, this second chance that almost wasn't. What changed you? Beckett looked at her with eyes that were still hollow, but somehow lighter, cracked open just enough to let a sliver of light through. What you said about being invisible, about finding your people, I thought maybe I haven't looked hard enough. Maybe there's someone out there. There is. Hadley took his hands. I promise you there is. Will you let me help you find them? She spent the next 3 hours with Beckett, called his parents, called the local Hells Angels chapter in Arkansas, called as a therapist Shelby knew. By midnight, Beckett had a safety plan and a support network and a reason to see the morning. One kid, one life. That's what Shelby had said. That's what this was about. Years passed the way years do when you're building something that matters. Fast, relentless, measured not in days or months, but in lives touched, in kids saved, in the slow accumulation of evidence that one person's choice could ripple outward until it reached places she'd never see. Flint retired at 62, called Hadley on a Tuesday evening and told her he was done. Not done with caring, not done with the mission, done with his body which had been arguing with him for years and had finally won the debate. You don't need me anymore, he said. I'll always need you. No, you'll always love me. That's different. Hadley took his place as chairman of the foundation, the youngest leader of a national nonprofit in American history. She hired Colton as deputy director. She kept every original biker involved, and she never forgot where it started. The letter came to her on New Year's Eve, not from a stranger, from Flint, who had been holding it for months waiting for the right moment. Your mother gave this to me after the conference in Austin, he said. They were standing on the roof of the foundation building, watching fireworks explode over Millbrook. Your grandmother wrote it before she died. Instructions were not to open it until you were old enough. He paused. I think you were ready. Hadley took the envelope with shaking hands. Old paper yellowed with age. Her name on the front in handwriting she recognized. Handwriting she hadn't seen in 10 years, but would know anywhere in any lifetime on any surface. Pearl Dawson's handwriting. She opened it. My dearest Hadley, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. Sorry I couldn't watch you grow up. Sorry for every birthday and graduation and wedding I'll miss. But I'm not sorry for the choice I made. The day I put you in that cellar, I knew what would happen. I could feel it in my bones, the way I've always felt storms, the way you feel them too, because you got that from me, baby girl. The tornado was coming for our house, and I couldn't save both of us. So I saved you. That's what love is. Not the easy stuff, not the hugs and the bedtime stories and the cookies on Sunday morning. Love is making the hard choice. Love is giving everything you have so someone else can have a chance. You're going to do great things, Hadley. I've known it since the day you were born, since you opened those eyes and looked at me, and I swear you saw right through me. You see people, baby, really see them. Not what they show the world, but what they're hiding underneath. That's a gift most folks never develop. Don't waste it. Find your storm. The thing that scares you so much, you want to run away from it. Then run toward it, because that's where you'll find your purpose. That's where you'll find your people. That's where you'll find the life that's been waiting for you all along. I love you more than words can say, and I'll be watching over you. Always. Give them hell, baby girl. All my love, Grandma Pearl. Hadley read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and pressed it against her heart. She knew, Hadley whispered. She knew I'd find my storm. Flint put an arm around her shoulders. She raised you. Of course she knew. Below them, the foundation building glowed with light. Kids were gathering for the New Year's celebration, laughing and shouting and being young and alive in a way that some of them had never expected to be. 300 bikers, thousands of mentees, a movement spreading across the country like ripples from a stone thrown into water that had no edges. Hadley looked up at the sky, clear, dark, full of stars and fireworks and the vast uncharted territory of everything that hadn't happened yet. Happy New Year, Grandma, she whispered. And somewhere beyond the fireworks, beyond the cheering, beyond the cold winter sky and everything it contained, she could have sworn she heard a voice whisper back, Happy New Year, baby girl. I'm so proud of you. 10 years after the tornado, Hadley returned to Millbrook one final time, stood in front of the Pearl Dawson Memorial Library, touched the bronze plaque with fingers that remembered everything. The foundation had helped over 100,000 kids, 247 schools across 38 states. Teenage suicide rates in participating districts had dropped 43%. 15,000 mentors trained and deployed. Numbers that would have seemed impossible to a girl standing barefoot in the ruins of her grandmother's house, calling for someone who would never answer. Hi, Grandma. It's been a while. She sat on the bench beneath the plaque, the same bench where she had cried on opening day, the same bench where hope had first taken root in the rubble of everything she'd lost. I did it. Everything you asked. I found my storm. I ran toward it. I didn't give up. Silence, but not empty silence. The silence of a place that held memory the way a cathedral holds light. A sound behind her, footsteps, small, hesitant. The sound of someone approaching who wasn't sure they had permission to be there. Miss Dawson Hadley turned. A young girl stood a few feet away, maybe 12 or 13, skinny, nervous, eyes darting like a bird ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. She was wearing a shirt 2 sizes too big, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had been tied in a hurry, and she was shaking. Hadley recognized everything about her, every gesture, every signal, every invisible wound that the world couldn't see, but Hadley could because she had carried the same ones for years. My name is Lainey. The girl's voice was barely a whisper. I'm in the mentorship program at my school in Houston. I wanted to say, she couldn't finish. The words dissolved into the trembling that had taken over her whole body. She didn't have to finish. Hadley stood up and walked to her. I know, she said it softly, gently. The way you speak to someone standing on the edge of something. I know exactly what you were going to say. Because I thought about it too. Lainey's eyes went wide. You did every day. For years. Until someone saw me. Until someone told me I mattered. Hadley took the girl's hands. They were cold. The same cold Colton's hands had been. The cold of a body running on fear instead of blood. You matter, Lainey. Whatever you're going through, whatever voices in your head are telling you to give up, they're wrong. You are valuable. You are worthy. You are exactly who you're supposed to be. I don't feel like that. I know. It takes time. It takes practice. It takes people who remind you over and over until you finally start to believe it. Hadley squeezed her hands. But that's what we're here for. That's what the program is for. To keep saying it until it sticks. Lainey lunged forward and hugged her. Hadley hugged back. Tight. Fierce. The way Flint had hugged her. The way Pearl would have hugged her if she'd had the chance. The way you hold someone when you know that this moment, this single point of contact between two human beings, might be the thing that tips the scale between giving up and holding on. You're going to be okay. Hadley whispered it into the girl's hair. I promise you're going to be okay. How do you know? Because I was you. And look at me now. Lainey pulled back, wiped her eyes, and smiled, a small smile, fragile, uncertain, but real. The circle continued. That evening, Hadley stood on a stage in Millbrook Town Square. The crowd was the largest she had ever seen. Thousands of people, bikers, mentees, families. The whole broken, beautiful, rebuilt community of Millbrook, Texas, and beyond. Flint stood in the front row. Old now. Gray. Leaning on a cane he pretended he didn't need. But standing, still standing, Shelby beside him, silver-haired and fierce, holding his arm. Darla was there. Colton and Jolene. Wren, who had just completed her psychology degree. Bridger, who had won 3 state chess championships. Eli with his boyfriend and his father standing side by side. Tatum nervous but present, proving every day that the distance between who you were and who you could become was measured not in miles but in choices. 10 years ago, I stood on a table and screamed at strangers. Hadley's voice rang out clear and strong across the square. Laughter from the crowd. I was terrified, 14 years old, invisible, convinced that nothing I did would ever matter. But I climbed onto that table anyway. Because sometimes the only thing standing between disaster and survival is one person crazy enough to try. She paused. Let the silence do its work. My grandmother taught me that. She gave her life so I could live, and I have spent every day since trying to be worthy of that sacrifice. I'm still not sure I am. Still not sure I've done enough, but I know one thing. She looked at Flint. I know that I'm going to keep trying every day for the rest of my life. Because that's what you do. That's what family does. The crowd cheered. Hadley raised her hand. You don't give up on each other. You don't walk away when things get hard. You stand on tables and you scream until someone listens. She stepped back from the podium. My name is Hadley Dawson. I'm the girl who screamed at 70 Hell's Angels about a tornado. And I will never stop screaming. I will never stop climbing onto tables. I will never stop running towards storms. Because that's what we do. That's what survivors do. That's what family does. 3,000 voices roared in response. The sound shook the ground, shook the buildings, shook the air itself. Hadley stood in the spotlight, tears streaming down her face, the cheering of thousands filling her ears, and felt her grandmother everywhere. In the crowd, in the cheering, in the pride on Flint's weathered face, in the bronze plaque on the library wall, in the eyes of every kid who had ever felt invisible and had found, through the simple radical act of being seen, a reason to stay. Pearl Dawson had given her 8 minutes. Hadley had turned those 8 minutes into a lifetime. And she was just getting started. Because storms never stop coming, and neither did she.